We're live.
All right, thank you everyone for coming to today's special meeting of the Phoenix City Council. We asked for this special meeting because of some information put out by the Federal Aviation Administration regarding the procedural posture of the dispute that we're having with the FAA over the new departure procedure out of Sky Harbor Airport. I want to say thank you to my colleagues who took time out of their very busy schedules and accommodated this important meeting. Obviously, we have a quorum of the City Council present. We have one or more members of the City Council who are participating by phone. So we'll start out this meeting. Could the clerk please call the roll?
Councilman Nowakowski? Here. Councilman Waring?
Here.
Councilwoman Pastor?
Here.
Councilman Gates?
Here.
Councilwoman Gallego?
Here.
Councilman DeCiccio? Councilwoman Williams? Mayor Stanton?
I am here. I just want to let everyone in the audience know that because this is a special meeting, council members do have very, very busy schedules. Some may have to leave for a moment to take a short meeting, come back. We'll obviously always have a quorum of the City Council present for any public testimony that is obviously going to occur as part of this meeting. So I appreciate your patience in that regard. Again, thanking the council members for making time for this special meeting. The point of this meeting is to have the city, in particular our representatives who serve for us, the City Council and the people of the City of Phoenix on the FAA working group, to have them an opportunity to report out to the council and obviously the public as well, the ongoing workings of the working group, and obviously this council will have some important decisions to make about our continuing participation in that working group as well. It is the practice of the City Council not to take a vote, particularly on litigation in a public setting. That's obviously occurs during the executive session, but there still may be a motion for action on behalf of the City Council at the end of this meeting. My request is that we give our professional staff, as well as Congressman Pastor, who represented us on the working group, an opportunity to present to this council and the community first. Then we'll take comments from members of the community, and then we'll take comments and any actions on behalf of this City Council. So if none of the members of the City Council disagrees with that way to proceed, then let's move forward. Congressman in advance indicated he may not be able to stay for the entire meeting because he's receiving a very prestigious award tonight. So after you have the opportunity to give your presentation, Congressman, whenever you have to leave, us and the community totally understands you have to have time to put on a tie so you can receive that prestigious award tonight. I want to make sure you have plenty of time. You got to look good. With that, Mr. City Manager, are you kicking off, Mr. Blue?
Well, Mayor, I think I missed Vice Mayor Valenzuela in the roll call, who is present.
Here.
And I believe Mr. DeCiccio?
I'm here.
Thank you. Mayor, thank you so much for calling the meeting today. We are here because we share the disappointment of the mayor and the council and the anger at some of the information we've received. And so Mr. Blue and staff are here to present on that. I'll introduce the folks at the table. Paul Blue is Deputy City Manager, oversees the Aviation Department. Tammy Fisher is our Acting Aviation Director. Of course, you've introduced our former Congressman, Ed Pastor, who is a participant on the working group. Next to him is Assistant Aviation Director Chad Makowski, who is also a participant. And from Landrum and Brown, Tom Cochran. Cornell, I'm sorry. Tom Cochran does something else. Tom Cornell, who has been with us on the working group as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Blue.
Mayor and Council, over the past 2 months, a talented group of people, which Ed just described, has been working with the FAA to study alternatives for the new flight paths. And as we indicated, the FAA's process has been very frustrating and unproductive from our perspective. We're very disappointed that we have not come to or found with the FAA agreeable solutions, and our goal today is to talk you through what has happened, what our analysis of that is, and some recommendations we have proceeding forward. But before we move into a staff recommendation, I would like to ask and thank in advance Congressman Pastor to say a few words about his experience with the FAA working group process and his experience with the FAA in Washington. Congressman?
Well, I can tell you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, that working with the FAA as a member of Congress is a lot different than being a volunteer before. So things do change. First of all, let me thank you and the council members for allowing me to participate in this effort. Along with many of my neighbors that are behind me, as well as some people on this table, are affected by the FAA decision. So for me, representing the city was not only an honor, but I think it was a responsibility that I had to see what I could do to mitigate the noise and remove it. So I have to tell you that I'll go very shortly through a series of what I thought happened, and then open it up for questions if you may have any. When the first meeting, I believe, was February 12th, 13th, of the working group. And I have to tell you that the working group basically was comprised of the FAA, specialists of the FAA, air traffic controllers, and et cetera, and the airlines. So the industry, the airline industry was represented. Chad, Tom, and myself were there to try to advocate changes on behalf of the city. But the working group, which was the FAA, were the ones that were going to set parameters and make the decisions and make recommendations. So we were there to be advocates. At the first meeting that we had, Councilman Nowakowski, Councilwoman Pastor, and Councilwoman Gallegos came and testified before the working group. And they had recommendations and made comments of how the constituents were being affected. Also, we had a person from the city of Phoenix, a staff person, who was responsible for the historic designations, and also explained to the working group of how the historic district came about and the ramifications. We, again, met at the same time. We told the working group of our concern, not only of the northwest lines, but of the southwest. And we basically concluded, because they wanted to take the testimony and come back a week later. So a week later, we met again, and we were informed by the working group that the original charge by the FAA was that we were only to look at the northwest. But after the testimony that was given to them the prior week, that now the southwest lines were also going to be investigated and discussed. So we thanked them, because now we're including both the southwest and the northwest. They went through the process of informing us of, when a federal action is taken, what the different specialties and the different departments within the FAA have to conduct to ensure what the regulations require them to ensure. And at the same time, we learned that the FAA, in implementing this new program, their procedure was to form a metroplex. But due to various considerations, one, in that the FAA was having budget constraints, the Super Bowl was coming about, all of these factors, the FAA decided, and because the local TRICON, meaning the local people here in Phoenix, were working on the flight patterns, the new flight patterns, that they basically let the working group, the TRICON, Phoenix TRICON, to go ahead and design the new flight patterns and implement them. So the Metroplex was basically not implemented, which was probably the regular order for the FAA. And then obviously in September, the lines were implemented. So the three of us were strong advocates that the FAA should go back and study the original lines under the new technology and under the new guidelines, so that we could then determine whether or not they would meet the test of efficiency and safety and remove the noise from the downtown area, as well as the southwest and Levine and those areas. We were told that if they looked at that, it would be a new federal action, and it would be an action that would take them probably more than the 8 months or 10 months they thought it was feasible. But we made that request a number of times. We also objected to the FAA or the working group that the Grand Avenue was not an industrial area, that we argued that moving the southwest lines from the future 202 alignment, bringing it to 35th Avenue, it was bringing flights over residential. And so we made a number of, we expressed our concerns in how the original lines were no longer being considered and these new lines became in place. We were told by the working group that efficiency, which basically said that it would allow the planes to go up faster, it would save gasoline, it would reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, et cetera, that efficiency, the impact on the environment, safety, that these were the issues that they were concerned about, and that noise abatement was not an issue that they felt that was in their charge. They told us, the working group, that they would take our testimony, our concerns, the alternatives that we had suggested, and would come back in 2-3 weeks with their recommended alternatives. Well, from February 19th, we did not meet again till April 13th. So all that time, the FAA, a number of times they had scheduled meetings, but then they said, no, we can't do it, we're still working on the alternatives, and so we said, okay. And when we got to February 13th, we started asking questions because of the draft document they presented to us. They only recommended 2 alternatives and dismissed the rest of the alternatives. So in discussion, we said, why is it that some were dismissed and some you just basically didn't even look at? You just said no way, and you only recommended 2. Then they informed us that FAA leadership gave the charge to the working group that they were limited to working with alternatives that did not require a new federal action. So that meant that the working group, was limited to what they could do to the lines in terms of moving them laterally one point to the other. The other disappointment that we had was that we had requested information from the working group and the FAA that would give us the targets and the information that they use or were using to determine alternatives and determine the lines that are now in place. With great regret, they neither responded, or if they did respond, it was not in a timely basis. The little information they gave us, we just received a few days before the draft came out. So it was very difficult with those limitations to be able to go beyond the recommendations that we thought that they should look at to restore the original lines using the technology in place and make determinations of whether or not the safety and efficiency were diminished per their charge. At the meeting on February 13th, basically we heard, we asked, and we were given information. I informed the working group that the City Council was going to be meeting Wednesday, and that Chad, Tom, and I did not have the authority to give approval or rejection to their alternatives, but that their draft copy should be forwarded to the council and you, Mayor, so that you guys could determine what you wanted to do, because you have the authority and jurisdiction over this matter. They said, fine. And they said, but since I and Chad and Tom did not do our job and represent the city of Phoenix in a very good manner, they said, in their gracious manner, they're very, very gracious, Mr. Mayor, they said, we have a plan for you. And that was the second document. So I said, fine, give us a plan. And so the paper you received, along with the recommendations of the working group, is what they proposed. Since we failed to represent you well, they were kind enough and gracious enough to present to you and the members of the council what they think is different alternatives to what the problem is. And I chuckled at one of the recommendations that said, why don't you take money you're now investing in the historical districts and take that money and use it in noise mitigation? Well, they talked about roundtables, working voluntarily with the airlines, but you have those lists. 2 points I want to make. That the document that you received that was no longer a draft, the three of us only made one recommendation, and that was to create an error that they had. The final document that you received, there are changes, but they were done unilaterally. The working plan that you received was a result of the working group wanting to propose to you other alternatives. And so that is what you have before you. And so we apologize, at least because the FAA feels that we didn't represent you well, so we make that apology. And so you have the information. Well, let me leave it at that. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer.
All right, thank you very much, and I think I speak unanimously on behalf of this council. You represented us wonderfully well in Congress for over 20-plus years, and you represented us equally as well in your service as part of this working group. You accepted that request pro bono, and we really appreciate your time, effort, and the credibility that you brought to this process on behalf of this council, on behalf of the people of the city of Phoenix. So I appreciate the sentiment, what you were saying, but you know from us, Congressman, how much we respect you and know how well you represent this community and how passionate you are about representing this community. The Congressman has to leave in about a half hour. I know we have more presentation from staff. How much longer is the presentation? Because I do want council to have the opportunity to ask questions of the Congressman.
Mayor, our recommendation would be to ask your questions of the Congressman at this point, and then staff has about between 20 and 25 minutes of presentation, but we would encourage you to ask your questions of the Congressman at this point.
All right, so questions by members of the council for Congressman Pastor as part of his experiences as the working group. Councilman Nowakowski first.
Congressman, first of all, I just want to thank you, and I believe that you represented the city of Phoenix to its fullest. We had a choice, and they asked us to have one person representing the city of Phoenix on this committee. And we thought long and hard, and we said, who best than the congressman that has represented this area for 20 years, a person that has represented South Phoenix, has represented Levine, Maryville, downtown, and our historic district. And that's why we've chosen the best person possible for the job. You asked for some staff members that had some expertise in the airline industry, so that's why we given you the two staff members that are sitting at the table. I believe we had the A team on that working group, and I believe you did a well job. The question I have is, did you all give them any alternative routes? Because according to this memo, you all didn't give them anything. So some clarification on that.
We started a conversation with them, and at the second meeting we had, we requested that the working group look at going to the original lines and make a determination with the technology they have in place and now using, whether or not safety and efficiency would be diminished, or would it be enhanced, or whatever, so that we, or you, the city council, would know the result of that. Basically, they came back and they said the leadership of the FAA has limited the work and only gave them the charge to look at those alternatives that did not require federal action and could be implemented, developed and implemented within 6 to 8 months. And so the recommendations we gave them, we thought were the ones that the council would really want to know and look at. But as I told you, the charge that the working group had limited them to what they could look at, and therefore limited us in terms of being able to sit down and even talk about some of these, because it was not negotiation. It was basically, we're given this charge, and this is the best you're going to get.
Councilman, I know Chad's going to present in more detail some of those proposals from the city of Phoenix as part of this process, in part of his presentation as well.
Mayor?
Well, let me go to Councilman Waring first, and then Councilman DeCiccio. Councilman Waring.
Thank you. Congressman, you and I are different sides of the aisle, but I have great respect for your long history of work. I think any assertion that you didn't do a good job representing Phoenix is rather silly.
We're both Venetians.
We are both Phoenicians, and I don't know how we would have got your expertise, and we got it for free. So we could have paid $1 million and not gotten that good. So anybody who said that's just being silly. Having said that, I was concerned when this started. You know, a part of your comments I interpreted as it almost sounds like they're just kind of running out the clock or something, to use a sports analogy. I was afraid of that. You know, when we started down this road, I thought, frankly, we should have taken a little more hard and firm definitive action for that very reason, because once these things get established, every day goes by, they get more entrenched, it's harder and harder to undo them. Having said that, and maybe this is a question for the staff, I'm not sure, and if it is, maybe we could table it for later, but the Metroplex process, isn't that a little bit looking at all these lines all over again? And if it's a question that's better to hold for later,
Well,
but I'm not sure how familiar you are with that.
I will happy to give you my opinion.
Yes, that'd be great.
And I'll give you my opinion, and staff can contradict it or agree with it or whatever. But in my opinion, the Metroplex was not involved in the original line preparation, development, and design. As I told you, it was the local Tricon that basically designed and implemented, and it was the air traffic controllers and other staff. And it included representation from the airlines. And that we found out at one of our meetings with the working group, that the airlines had representation with the Tricon to design the lines that are in place today. The FAA leadership decided not to implement the process that they were implementing in other cities. They were going to wait till the Tricon got finished, and then once that was done, then they were going to implement a Metroplex for Sky Harbor. And I believe they're either in the process of doing it or they have completed it. So now you have, out at Sky Harbor, or will have, a Metroplex that will be working with Sky Harbor as well as other airports around the area. This Metroplex will determine future lines, future routes, etc. My opinion is that the problem that Sky Harbor will face in the future is that the Metroplex only has the lines that are in place. And so they'll have to work from those lines as they implement future lines. I personally believe that there was a flawed process that brought you to the first lines initially. And so I think, in my opinion, the consequence is with the Metroplex now in place, that they will deal and work with future lines using what you have as a base.
All right, it's only this now as the baseline. It just seems like because we've had a couple well-attended community meetings up in my district on this issue, there's been concerns that the Sky Harbor changes impact Scottsdale Airport, which is right next door to my district, right across the street, in fact. So, you know, I've asked citizens to contact the FAA about the Metroplex process, but of course, you know, it gets back to the point of once these lines become embedded over a period of time, now that's the new baseline, and you're operating off of that, and it really renders the citizen input a little moot if you're already starting with something they're already unhappy with. But maybe these are detailed questions that are probably better for staff, Mayor, so if I could just table that and come back.
Yeah, we'll ask
Okay.
Chad and the team. Councilman DeCiccio, did you have questions specifically for Congressman Pastor? And then I know Councilman Gates does as well. Councilman DeCiccio.
I do. It's more of a comment, Mayor. I want to thank Congressman Pastor for all the work that he's done. He's always done an incredible job for the city of Phoenix, not just for the city, but for our state and for our nation. And like Jim Waring, Congressman and I are definitely on the opposite ends of the political spectrum. But Congressman Pastor has always been reaching out, and he and I have had an incredible working relationship for many, many years. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that I respect his knowledge and the fact that he knows what he's doing. And he did bring the type of credibility we needed to bring to this process. I think there were a couple of us on the council that really thought the FAA wasn't going to do anything. But by bringing in Congressman Pastor, we were able to bring someone in who knew the process, who knew it better than anybody that I've ever met, and was able to see and reveal to us what a lot of us believed, but he was able to bring the facts to the table. And on a personal note, Congressman, I've got to tell you, your daughter is doing a fantastic job in the city of Phoenix. No, she really is. She's proven to be a leader, and she's proven to be able to pull together coalitions. I mean, what she has done on this issue, Congressman, has been outstanding. I don't think that there's anyone other than Councilman Nowakowski and possibly Councilwoman Gallego, but Councilwoman Pastor has just done a fantastic job, and you should be very, very proud of what she has accomplished so far on the council, Congressman. And to that effect, I will be following her lead and the lead of Councilman Nowakowski on this issue. And I am convinced that they're going to be putting together a very strong proposal, and I am going to be following their lead. Thank you, Congressman, for everything you've done.
Well, thank you, Councilman, for your service to the city. And I also want to thank you for your friendship and the working relationship we have together. And when I go home this evening, I'm going to congratulate my dear wife and tell her what a great job she's done.
Well, you both have done that, Congressman, and you're just a fantastic person, and I admire you considerably.
Councilman Gates?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Congressman. Just echo what everyone else has said. We were so fortunate that you're willing to do this on a pro bono basis for us, and you really have done a fantastic job. I did want to ask you a few questions about this whole concept of environmental studies. So when the FAA made this first change, they didn't do an environmental study for the basis as a basis for that, did they?
Well, I don't know, because that's something that we didn't discuss. But I did hear, and the woman who does the FAA environmental stuff. Did she say that some of the environmental studies were waived? But she had a term.
Categorical exclusion?
Yeah, categorical exclusion. That there were, in some of the environmental studies or requirements, there was categorical exclusion. Now, I don't have a definition for that, and I'm sure that you can ask that question to either Tom or Chad. But I did hear that term a number of times when asked about environmental impact studies on the lines.
Okay, and yeah, we'll follow up with that definitely. But then what I understood you to say then was that they decided in responding to our request that any new air paths, any other flight paths that involved having to do a new environmental study, they weren't willing to even consider that.
It was not so much an environmental impact statement. It was that if they took the alternatives that we were asking for, that it would be a new federal action. And I believe the definition of federal action would be that they have to now undergo all the litany of different regulations that require a federal action. So it would require environmental, it would require historical, it would require safety, efficiency, and I guess there's a number of issues that would be involved in that federal action. And I asked, well, why not? Why didn't you do it? So why didn't you do it? They said, the working group responded, they said, their leadership, the FAA leadership, charged in their charge to the working group that they could not consider any alternative that would require a new federal action. So therefore, the working group was limited to what they could do in a small, narrow space in moving lines. And I think the determination was what, 0.3? 3 miles. 0.3 miles. So they, the FAA leadership, made the determination to the working group, FAA working group, that they couldn't look at anything that required a new federal action, and they wanted whatever they recommended as an alternative, the working group recommended as an alternative, to be able to be developed and be implemented within 6 to 8 months.
So in other words, they were only willing to do tweaks at best.
At best, I believe I would say yes, that tweaks.
And was that, so it sounded like there were just 2 meetings in the working group, right? One on February 19th?
There were three.
Okay. There was February 19th, there was April 13th.
February 12th, and that's when the council members testified, as well as some of your staff. Then the 12th, the 3 of us were able to meet with the working group, and they basically detailed to us what a federal action, what were the litany of things they had to do, and then also in us asking them, well, how in the hell did you get the first lines? Them telling us what happened. So that's how we got some of the knowledge of what happened in the original designation of the lines that are in place today, because we kept asking them, what the hell happened? And so it was that kind of conversations, and then we said, we want you to go back and go to the original lines and test them out using the technology that's in place today, so that you can determine the impact on efficiency and safety, and hopefully resolve, as a consequence of going back to the former lines, the noise abatement would have occurred.
And did they ever indicate before this April 13th meeting that all they were willing to do was agree to small tweaks? Or did they indicate that they were willing to look at this in good faith?
They never indicated, they only talked about, at least with me, they only talked about setting new dates to meet. So they would call me and say, well, and can you set this date? Okay, I'll set it, and then they'd call back and say, well, we won't be able to have it because we're still not done. And so finally, 1st of April, about the 6th or 7th, that they were ready to deliver a draft, and if I would put the 13th aside to meet that day. But staff may be able to tell you of their conversations with the working group.
But you talked about the Metroplex process, and the fact is, once they go through the Metroplex process, that is a federal action, right?
Well, as I understand it, as the FAA was implementing this new system, they decided that the process and procedure for the FAA would be to form this Metroplex and then have the Metroplex deal with the development and implementation of the new system. In Phoenix, as I understand from the conversations of the working group, for whatever reason, and you'll hear Super Bowl, you hear sequestration, you hear budget cuts, the FAA decided to forego the implementation of a Metroplex and went ahead and allowed the local TRICON, which means the people working out there for the FAA at the airport, along with representation from the airlines, to develop the new lines and implement them. Now, what process in terms of regulations they had to follow, or what they did in achieving and implementing those lines, I can't tell you, and I doubt it if staff knows, because it's something that they didn't want to talk about. Your staff had requested, I think in December, that they have access to the working papers that the TRICON used to implement the lines that you have right now. And it's my understanding, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, that they have not received that information to date.
Well, Congressman Pastor, I think you've done an incredible job representing us through this process, but I'm very disappointed that it sounds like the folks on the other side of the table did not come into this with an open mind. They did not operate in good faith, in my opinion, and I'd like to follow up with staff on some other questions based upon, but the information that you've given, but it's been very helpful, and I hope, I apologize to you that I hope you don't feel like you wasted your time because of the way that the FAA responded to, and has responded to this situation so far. But again, thank you very much.
Councilman, I have great respect for public service. And being a member of the federal government for many years, I respect the agencies and I will tell you today that I do not blame the working group. I do not blame Glenn Martin, but they were charged with limitations. They were charged with what they could do and not do. And so it'd be wrong of me to say that I blame the working group. Their orders came from the FAA leadership or higher. And so I think they attempted to do the best they could. And but they were also under limitations, and so it just that I think initially their charge was so limiting, and our ability to get information was so limiting that basically you have the results before you today.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you very much, Councilman Gage. You raised some excellent points. One of the tragic ironies of this entire circumstance is that a categorical exclusion was allowed for the process that created this tremendous problem. But to fix it, there will be no such categorical exclusion. A second tragic irony is that in order to qualify for the categorical exclusion, the FAA had to represent that this would not have a negative impact on the communities in which the path would go over. And obviously that may be the subject of a significant adversarial situation that's being created between us and the FAA about whether or not they accurately portrayed what they needed to portray in order to qualify for the categorical exclusion. Other council members, questions for Congressman Pastor? I did promise him he would get out of here in an hour so he could get ready for his important event this evening. Before Councilman Waring, any other members of the council? And we'll have the opportunity to make statements or ask the staff questions after we've finished the full presentation. Councilman Pastor, did you have something?
Oh, I do have something.
Please.
So we were talking, or you were speaking about the process. And so I firmly believe FAA did not operate in the right process. So in order for them to do that and to do the right thing, it would require them to go back and go to the original lines and begin the process over. In the whole dialogue, what I had heard or what I was told was that if we went back to the old process, it would take a year. That their charge was, get this in limited in scope, we want these changes to happen within 6 to 8 months. My comment back to Glenn Martin was, if it takes a year, do the right thing and get it done right with everybody at the table. So my understanding is really where it all happened is in the Tri-Con. And in the representatives of the Tri-Con were the airlines, traffic controllers, and FAA representatives, and I believe one city staff member. And all the operation happened within the Tri-Con with the influence of many wanting to change the lines for efficiency and safety. My question to you is, in writing and creating policy in Congress, and specifically in Next Gen, who has influence in writing that policy or persuasion in what to see is considered safety and efficiency?
Well, the intent, as I recall, and this basically started maybe 15, 16 years ago, because we felt that the FAA and the whole safety of the aviation should be based on a satellite system rather than a ground radar. And it would create greater safety and greater discretion for the pilot, et cetera. So the Congress, as it wrote its legislation and its funding, basically it was to create a system that would be more efficient and more and would be safer. But at the same time, I don't believe that the intent was to do away with the issue of noise abatement or noise mitigation, because I sat in many appropriation hearings where we discussed appropriating money not only for engine development, for airport mitigation, noise mitigation, and so the intent, I believe, of Congress was to create a safer system, a more efficient system, but not to create it so that there would be greater noise impact on our constituents. The policies, once the law is written, is developed by the agency who has that jurisdiction. And so basically the FAA, or Department of Transportation with the FAA, then writes the regulations, and they go through, the public process, et cetera. So we did not write the policies was written by the agency.
Additional questions by members of this council?
So I
Before
want to be
please,
clear on
please,
that
of course.
noise was not also one of the items being looked at in all the alternatives. Noise was never considered, that it was never considered the impact that it was having within the community and what has happened within the community. And so I felt it was very important, or all of us felt it was very important to have this community hearing due to the fact to hear the other side of what happened. And what FAA has delivered to us and has put blame on the working committee, we now hear the other side of what really happened in that working committee. And so I am as much as a disappointment I have at this moment and really dismay at this whole process. I am hoping that all our partners that are sitting within this room, we figure out a way and organize ourselves in a way that we can see change within our community, which includes not only neighborhoods participating, but it also includes that the airlines are participating at the table, and that FAA is at the table, and that there is a true collaboration and dialogue happening to assist us in relieving us with the noise that we're having at this impact. And so those that are in the room know who I'm talking to, and I'm hoping to see that dialogue begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Valenzuela?
Thanks, Mayor. Congressman, I just want to thank you publicly, as we all have many times. Thank you for advocating on our behalf. Prior to your time with Congress 23 years ago, certainly during your time with Congress, and immediately saying yes when you picked up the phone when we asked if you would be our representation in this working group. And I think to everyone else who is here, who's been advocates for our neighborhoods and our city in official and unofficial roles, it's just great to see you. I don't think we can find better representation for any of us here, but it's just great to see you to continue to say yes to that, as you put it, an honor, but also the responsibility to advocate on our behalf. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Councilman Valenzuela. Councilman Waring, one follow-up question.
I do. I have a follow-up on the categorical exclusion, because I think perhaps I'm a little confused, and sometimes we use jargon like categorical exclusion, and then even some of us up here might be confused, and I want to just kind of narrow it down.
It's a very technical term, so.
Well, it's probably a new one to most everybody in the audience, and some up here too, I'm sure. So Mayor Stanton and Councilwoman Pastor, who I think you know, they both mentioned the categorical exclusion. I want to make sure I have it right. So I think initially when we first had our first meeting about this, we asked, can you switch the lines back? And I think the answer was no. And is the answer no because of the categorical exclusion, they were able to make the change? Well, I'll ask.
The answer is no.
So they can't switch back because of the categorical exclusion, or they would have to go through more processes to switch back? That's why I'm confused.
Their claim is that by going back to the original lines, using the technology that's in place today, okay, that they're using now that we have these new lines, that it would be a new federal action.
Which wouldn't have the categorical exclusion.
Well, you would then have to go through the whole litany of regulations. Now, you can ask staff the question that possibly in going back and doing the new federal action, that they could invoke categorical exclusion, I guess.
Mayor, members of council, the answer to that is they would go through what's called an initial environmental review, which is somewhat of a checklist based on the conditions that they're proposing. They would identify if it hits certain thresholds or triggers, and that would tell them what level of review they do, what level of environmental or NEPA review they do. The first and the kind of the lowest or most concentrated level of review would be the categorical exclusion. That level of review does not have public outreach as a required component. The second, more involved level of review is what's called an environmental assessment. And then the full-blown review would be the environmental impact statement, similar to what you saw on the South Mountain Freeway corridor, for example, which is a multi-year, very extensive process. So it is possible that they would be able to do that under a categorical exclusion. However, I would suggest that it would be highly unlikely. They would likely do the environmental assessment process.
So I guess just in layman's terms, I was going to say something in layman's terms, and then you can tell me if it's correct interpretation or not. So they're claiming on September 17th, I think that was the date, right? To switch to 18th or something.
18th.
So, but the 17th they had the old lines.
Yep.
And on the 18th they started new lines, and within a couple weeks everybody was mad, and we're having meetings and so forth. When we make a suggestion that they go back to the old lines, they're saying no, because to go back to the lines that they've been using for how many years did they use those lines?
For decades.
Decades. So for decades they were doing, and they said, oh, we can't switch back because now we got to go through this whole process to do something that they've been doing for decades. This is where people get frustrated with their government. I don't blame them. So we had an exception to change and make everybody mad, but we don't have an exception to switch back where there was sort of peace in our time with honor. It's an odd, I mean, is that a fair, looks like you're mouthing yes, so.
Mayor and Councilman Waring, that is accurate. In fact, what they
I mean,
did-
that's absurd. They understand that's absurd, right?
Right. Their argument was to go back immediately would require them to use the old procedures because that's all they had designed on those old routes. And so that was what they used as the reason for not doing it immediately.
I don't know, that sounds silly. I mean, just to a layman, that just sounds silly, so.
All right, well, thank you
for
very much,
clarifying.
Councilman. We want to get to the,
Could I
Congressman, please, of course.
That's why we ask, go back to the old lines using the technology that you have in place, what they're using today. And that way you could determine whether or not the efficiency or the safety is any way affected to what you're doing today. And basically they said no.
All right, thank you very much, Councilman. And I think I want to make sure the issue about the category exclusion or lack thereof, excuse me, the use of the category exclusion to create these new lines, the problematic lines, and the inability to use the category exclusion to fix the problem that's been created. I think the frustration, rightfully so, is that is the fact that a category exclusion was not appropriate in the first place. And the only way to utilize a category exclusion was to present inaccurate information regarding the impact on the community. You're only supposed to use a category exclusion if there is not a significant impact on the community. We are here today because obviously the premise upon which they used a category exclusion was wrong. It was inaccurate. And so it shouldn't have been used. And that's why the request by the city was to go back before the use of the category exclusion because it was flawed in the first place. That's one of our significant legal arguments that we have on our behalf, is that the use of the category exclusion was inappropriate. All right, any other questions? And Congressman, from all of us, thank you. You can stay as long as you want, but I promise that it wouldn't be a significant period of time. You've gone beyond the time that I even originally thought that you would have to be here. So stay as long as you want. I know you have one more point to make, but then whenever you have to leave, thank you in advance for your service.
I will
Please,
leave
Congressman.
after this point. My contract reads till 3:30, so let me.
I make a motion to extend that contract.
We'll pay you double, Congressman.
It's out of order.
We'll pay you double after 3:30.
I just want to tell you, and Councilman Valenzuela and all the members of the council, thank you for your accolades. But being an elected official is a form of public service, And once you're not elected, it does not mean that you have a responsibility to be of public service. And that's a way of helping our community. And so it was an honor for me to do the best we could in representing you in this effort. And if there are other matters that I can be of service, obviously, I'm there for you. And so I thank you for your willingness to have me do this. And as a citizen of Phoenix, it's very important that we work together in order that we keep this great city going forward, and we have a quality of life that we all deserve. But in my parting remarks, it was really great working with my disappointing partners to the FAA. As you know, Tom is a consultant, and I would kid him that he should charge by the hour, not by the words, because. But obviously, he has a great expertise and was able to provide us with the information and technical knowledge that allowed us to be as effective as we could. And Chad, being a city employee, has the knowledge and the skill and know-how and the working ability to be effective. And so I want to thank them for working with me and a great time we had in going through this effort, because it was really an honor for me to work with them. And for that, Mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Blue, I know we have additional presentation from members of our professional staff, including we wanted to provide both this council and the public significant detail as to the proposals that we had presented to the working group as options that obviously were rejected by the FAA as part of this working group. We wanted the opportunity for the public to fully understand the work that was put in by the Congressman Chad, our team from Langdon Brown, and you know, options that we had presented that unfortunately did not have a real opportunity to be thoroughly vetted. So, Mr. Blue, I don't know if you want to introduce the next one.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you. Chad Makowski and Tom Cornell will pick up this next portion of the presentation from staff, going through what happened in the working group and the conclusions that we have drawn and some of the information you've already discussed. And then Tammy will close out the presentation with some specific actions and recommendations that we have as staff. So take it away, Chad.
Thank you. Mayor, members of council, the congressman did such a fantastic job of explaining what the working group did that I promise I will move through this presentation as efficiently as possible. Just by way of recap, on December 16th, the City Council met in a policy session specific to FAA flight path departures. And at that meeting, they directed staff to request the FAA to return to the previous flight paths. Shortly after that meeting, City Manager Ed Zerker formally made that request to the FAA Administrator Huerta. He did insist that we do move back to the former flight paths. On January 22nd of 2015, Administrator Huerta did respond to the city manager's letter. He denied the request to go back to the former procedures. And in specific, I wanted to highlight a couple of quotes in the paper because I think they're important. He indicates that we cannot revert to the procedures that were in use before September 18th, which is an indication to the city that he was referring to flipping back to the old technology, which we fully understand and respect. He also, in that same letter, committed to partnering with the airport and airlines to explore other potential adjustments to the procedures and emphasis added on to better manage noise issues. And so that was really the focus of us reconvening this PBN working group. So in terms of the FAA working group, again, the Honorable Congressman Ed Pastor served as the city's representative. I provided staff support to Congressman Pastor. It was my distinct honor and privilege to be able to do so. And Tom Cornell, to my right, served as our airspace consultant and expert, subject matter expert on any proposals that were provided to us. We did meet 3 times in total. The first meeting, as the Congressman indicated, was a listening session. The second meeting, we discussed the process that was about to take place and alternatives that the FAA would consider. And so nearly 8 weeks later, on Tuesday, April 7th, the FAA delivered a draft report of alternatives to the city. The FAA did not provide all the modeling data that the city had originally requested for the alternatives. So the city renewed its request the following day for the additional modeling data. What was surprising to us is the FAA indicated that they did not model any alternatives other than their preferred alternatives, but would create modeling of other alternatives to fulfill our requests. And they did do that on Friday, April 10th, one business day before we were scheduled to meet in the working group. They provided the additional modeling that we did request. Okay. A little bit of an assessment of the alternatives in the report that they gave to us. Of the 37-page initial draft that they provided to the city, a total of 14 alternatives west of the Phoenix airport were assessed and studied. The report was reviewed by Congressman Pastor, myself, and was independently reviewed and validated by Mr. Cornell as our airspace consultant. Surprising to us, and contrary to the Administrator Huerta's letter, other than to indicate that they would listen to city input, the noise report does not formally acknowledge the city or the congressman's role as a formal participant in the working group. Also, contrary to the letter, the scope of work for the modeling team did not include noise mitigation as a required component of the scope of work, as the congressman discussed earlier. For the southwest corridor in particular, what we call the Levine corridor, the FAA also did not consider two of the alternatives that the city had requested that they review, in particular going back and looking at that South Mountain Transportation Corridor and another alternative that would more align with the river bottom. The FAA clearly rejected all options that resulted in lateral movement of flight tracks, and in many cases suggest that the current routes that are in place today are industrial corridors, and to move the flight tracks laterally would move them out of those corridors. We later discovered that contrary to the assertion that the FAA would seriously consider the alternatives put forth by the city, modeling team was given the distinct direction not to consider any alternative that would change the tracks by 0.3 of a mile or more. Most concerning to us, though, was that the report contained no noise modeling as we anticipated it would, and it lacked any concrete data to back up reasons to support or reject alternatives. Instead, the report noted in general terms that alternatives were more safe or less safe. And so even if we did agree, if you were to ask us, well, how much more safe is it, we would not be able to quantify that based on the data that we had received. And so, as noted in the city's legal protest, the FAA commented that in its Section 106 consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office, aircraft overflights were not expected to interfere with the sound of normal conversation. We dispute that, and we did some noise modeling to validate that. But what really helped us was that the FAA modeling that they provided to us in terms of the alternatives allowed us to do some additional modeling of our own, because we recognize the community doesn't work in the world of averages or day-night averages. They work in the world, and we understand noise as it's affecting us each time a plane flies by. And so what I'd like to do is ask Mr. Cornell. He helped us with taking that data that the FAA provided to us and put it in a graphical format that we think is very descriptive and helpful in understanding the impacts of the various alternatives. Mr. Cornell?
Okay. What we did was prepare base maps that looked at the population density around the airport with respect to looking at census data. And then we looked at a typical aircraft that flies in and out of the Phoenix area, being the Boeing 737-700, as a basis analysis to use for providing single event noise contours. What this is just basically showing here's how the noise level for a single flight overflying a particular area. Should be noted that this is just one aircraft, that there are aircraft that are louder and that are quieter than this aircraft, but it is a relatively frequent aircraft that operates at this area. The 75 dB SEL level generally equates to a normal speech at about 65. The way that it's computed, it ends up being about a 65 decibel level when it flies overhead, and that's about normal speech conversation. And that, as you look at the contours, evident along the edge of the contours, obviously, is where the noise is at the 65 or at that 75 SEL level. As you get towards the center, it actually is higher. One element is that the SEL level that we're showing you is not a metric that is used by the FAA to determine whether there's a significant impact to noise. It is a metric that is used in the industry, however, to evaluate just general flight procedures, and when you're looking at alternatives, it helps educate for noise outside of their typical DNL 65 or average noise levels of 65, what the noise levels might be.
Just a moment, Councilman Waring has a quick question.
Can I, so the data that you're going to show and the data that you used to show them came from the noise monitors that I think we authorized you to put up, correct?
Mayor, Councilman Waring, actually, there were two separate tasks. One was the noise monitoring for us in our legal protest to dispute what the FAA asserted. But in addition, rather than using our own data, the FAA supplied us targets data, what's called modeling data of the flight tracks. So we used the data they provided us in this situation to even validate it further, that what's happening in terms of the flight tracks, this is the expected impact to the community.
So this is their data we're looking at.
The contour is the product of Landerman Brown's technology. However, the flight track data for each of the alternatives was provided to us by the FAA and was used to create these maps.
So, because I know there's been, at the community meetings that I had, there were issues about, look, it's gone up, or the higher events are bigger, so they have to stop flying, right, or something like that. It's not used for that purpose. And I know there was some discussion, maybe you could clarify, about whether the FAA would even recognize our data as accurate, or valid, or whatever word you want to use.
Mayor and Councilman Waring, that is an important distinction to make. So the 65 DNL contour, or the annual day-night average, is what the FAA uses to determine things like funding for noise insulation or any of the other services we provide to the community. That is very different than what we're looking at here. What we want to know is, and what the purpose of these maps is to say, if we move the flight path from point A to point B, how does that affect our community? How will people react to that? And on a flight-by-flight basis, will that flight, when it goes over that person's house, potentially interfere with their sound of speech or their quality of life? And so that's really what this is about. The FAA is under no obligation to honor or acknowledge that the validity of this data.
So basically, it's about, is it louder here than it was before?
Yeah, exactly.
Boil
And
it down, that's what it is.
it's to help us to make an informed
It's not
decision.
a legal mechanism to make them stop flying or anything like that.
Other than through our legal protest, we can use it to assist us with the legal protest on some of the assertions they've made under the 106 consultation.
It was just to buttress our argument.
Yeah.
One other of the other benefits of this is that when you see a single line on a page, as you do in many of these, it doesn't necessarily reflect that the noise travels either side of that particular flight path. And so this gives you some idea of the width of the impact of an individual flight, that it isn't just the communities directly under that flight path, that there is some breadth to that impact.
But this is the loudest point, the lines that we're seeing, yeah.
Anything inside the line is loud. The line represents the outer edges of that. Yes, that's correct. So Mayor and Council, this is the baseline. This is what roughly the contours that were in place prior to September of last year. And so this is really what we were focused on in terms of the impacts and what what we were trying to get back to. And you'll see some data in the upcoming slides to help validate and compare how the alternatives compare to what was in place before. So go through very quickly some of the alternatives that the FAA had provided to us. The first was what they call a no-action alternative, and that's really to look at what would happen if they just kept everything as it was. The FAA did reject this alternative because they felt that there were other things that they could do that would have the potential to achieve greater efficiency, safety, and some of their other objectives. And again, that's exactly what this map looks like, the no-action alternative. As you can see, we have the current corridor going on Grand Avenue, the previous corridor to the left. And what we see here as we look at the population density under the new corridor is that there is a 68% increase in impacted population over what the previous contour, what happened prior to September 18th.
And Chad, to be clear, the previous corridor is what we asked the FAA through the working group process to return the flight paths to.
Mayor and Council, that is correct. The second alternative, or NW2 Northwest 2, is the FAA's preferred alternative. What they are suggesting here is to add a second RNAV waypoint along the route. What that might help do is help to streamline the route, make it a little more condensed or tighter. They also are suggesting altitude and speed restrictions to help get some of those planes that are flying lower up a little bit higher in altitude before they get to that first waypoint there. And so our assessment of that, it was ultimately the FAA's preferred alternative. Our assessment of that ultimately, though, is only about 7%, and I think that is included in the report, of the aircraft were not flying up above that fix. The vast majority were, and quite frankly, while we certainly we don't believe that this alternative would harm the community in any way, we don't believe it substantially helps to achieve any meaningful noise mitigation. Alternative Northwest 3 is an alternative the FAA did reject, and that was to revert to the pre-September 18th routing using legacy technology. The city also agrees that that would be a decrease in safety and efficiency, and so we did not have any concerns at all with this suggestion. Alternative Northwest 4 is to revert to the previous routings for the Northwest Corridor using RNAV technology, and this is the city's preferred alternative based on the noise modeling that we did. And so that is using the new technology going out on the old routes. What's important to note here is on this map, you will see the yellow line following exactly along the old corridor. However, on the next slide, what you'll see is the FAA's proposed corridor actually shifts north sooner than it did before. We believe that was just a modeling error on their part. Possibly they just didn't, I guess I can't speak for the FAA and why they did that, but I don't believe, it may not have been intentional, but it does show that they did an earlier turn than what would have otherwise been expected.
Chad, layman's term, that alternative would go back to the old turn point using satellite technology, not ground-based technology.
Mayor, that is exactly correct. Yep.
Okay.
What is important about this contour to acknowledge, though, is that this turn, it occurs right at about 35th Avenue, and so there was some discussion about, could we move the contour or move the flight out a little bit further to the west before it turns to the north, and what would that do to the community if we did that? We do see that, as modeled, it would be about a 37% increase in impacted population over what our previous requested routing is, so it's important to note that. Alternative Northwest 5, the FAA also rejected this alternative. This was to do an immediate right turn as soon as you got off the runway, which we're not exactly sure why the FAA modeled this alternative. It certainly was not a city-suggested alternative. As we look at it, you can see what the alternative looks like. Certainly goes right over downtown in areas north and east of Grand Avenue. Would result in a 126% increase in impacted population over the city's recommended alternative. Northwest 6 alternative, the FAA rejected this alternative as well, and this was to extend the initial turn further west. So you fly out on runway heading, go beyond where it turns currently at about 7th Avenue, and then make the turn just after the I-17. Our modeling shows a significant population to the west of Grand Avenue, and that would result in an increase of 109% of impacted population over the city's alternative. Northwest 7, the FAA rejected this alternative, and that's to add an RF leg, which is called a radius to fix leg. And in layman's term, all it does is it tightens up. You can kind of see at the elbow where the plane, the line first turns to the northwest. It's a pretty wide swath. An RF turn would, in essence, tighten that turn up significantly. The challenge with this, though, is not all, in fact, most aircraft are not yet equipped with this technology, and the FAA has no way of publishing this type of procedure currently, so it was immediately rejected by the FAA. Going to the southwest on the Levine corridor, the Southwest 1 was the no-action alternative. The FAA rejected this alternative. What you can see is the current contour is in purple. It results in a 70% increase in impacted population over South Phoenix and Levine over what would exist under the recommended alternative from the city, which is to go back to the previous routing. Alternative SW2 is the FAA's preferred alternative. It's to use the same routing, but to add altitude and speed restrictions, similar to the Northwest turn that they recommended. Again, we don't believe, because I think in this case, it was 12 to 17% of the aircraft, I think, are currently flying underneath the altitude restriction. Again, we don't think that the implementation of this procedure would harm the city in any way. However, we don't see this gaining any meaningful benefit to the people who are underneath that flight path. Alternative SW3, the FAA did reject this alternative. It was to revert to the pre-918 routing using legacy technology. We concur again for safety and efficiency benefits, but it is the most similar procedure to the one we requested, and unfortunately the FAA chose not to model the alternative that we requested, which is to go back to the old path using RNAV or new satellite-based technology. Alternative SW4 is to relocate the RNAV waypoint further west. You can see where the green is. It's to move it slightly further west. The FAA did reject this, citing efficiency concerns and potential safety concerns based on the runway heading before it makes the turn to the south. This would result in a 56% increase in impacted population over the city's recommended alternative. Alternative SW5, the FAA rejected this alternative, and that was to go runway heading further west before they make that first turn down to the waypoint in Laveen. And again, a 41% increase not only over South Phoenix and Laveen, but also over, you can see Central City also takes an additional burden with that turn. 41% increase over the city's preferred alternative. So that covers briefly the different alternatives that were in place. I'd like to just go briefly now over the PBM working group process. The Congressman did a fantastic job, so I will not dwell on this unless you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer them. But the FAA ultimately rejected 11 of the 14 possible alternatives that were made available to us in this working group. The FAA ruled out anything that would cause a new environmental process, as the Congressman said. The FAA also made it clear that unless instructed to do so, they would not consider adjustments purely for the purposes of noise mitigation. There had to be some other benefit, safety or efficiency, for them to consider that. It's clear the FAA preferred alternatives are not expected to mitigate noise for our community, and the FAA suggested that noise is really ultimately not an issue for them. It's instead a perception-based issue. They stated that the city needs to take the lead in solving this issue and offered some suggestions, many of which the city is already considering, and you'll hear more about that today. And so ultimately, the FAA rejected 11 of those 14 alternatives.
Councilman Waring, did you want to ask your question now? Do you have a quick question, please?
Well, I guess just for this process, I was concerned at the time. We're 4 months past now. We started, December 15th or something, so it's almost exactly 4 months. We're 4 months further down the road. Do we have anything to show the citizens here, or frankly, this council? And it's not a critique of you or Tom or certainly Congressman Pastor, but, was there anything that came out of this that shows even a glimmer of hope? Anything at all?
Mayor, Councilman Waring, we put our best good faith effort into this process.
Oh, I know you did.
And we did make a request. It was our expectation the FAA would, if they were to reject our requested alternatives, that they would give us a legitimate reason for doing so. We don't believe we've received a legitimate reason for doing so, other than they did not feel doing so would result ultimately in a new federal action, is what they continued to say, as the Congressman said. So I believe that the PBN working group process, while we had our best interests moving forward in this process, ultimately it's our opinion that the FAA was unable or was constrained in some way from producing anything that would produce meaningful results to the community.
I think Councilman DeCiccio and I feared, and I think others as well, but I remember he was very vocal as well, feared that if we didn't take immediate action back in December, that the further this goes, the more embedded it gets. From speaking with Congressman Pastor earlier, I think my fears are still there, maybe more than they were before. Are you expecting any more response from the FAA? I know you said there are things you haven't gotten now. Obviously, we got to make decisions here in short order. Are we going to be making them without any further information?
So, Mayor, Councilman Waring, the FAA has left the door open for the city to provide additional alternatives to them to continue to review. And so we'll talk about that in short order. But ultimately, we think that it's now time for the city and the community to take the lead in this issue and do what's right for the community, as opposed to wait on the FAA to produce anything that would be meaningful for us.
The way I'm interpreting us sending them more alternatives is just waiting for more rejection letters based on what we saw, possibly without even explanation.
That's our expectation.
I will say one thing, because it was mentioned before, as in terms of the airlines. Obviously, we've had airlines based in Phoenix. Our airport relies on them. Our citizens rely on them. I don't think anybody should look at them as the bad guy. Obviously, they should be participating in this process. Healthy airlines are good for the economy, good for us, good for citizens. I fly, we all fly. But I do think there was a way to handle this I mean, citizen input also has to be a critical component. It sounds like that wasn't included. I think we saw this, and I was skeptic, but I do think this was a chance. You know, citizens are now, as I think Mayor Stanton said earlier, you know, obviously there's an impact. We got a room full of people here. And I've had meetings, I think we've all probably had meetings of some sort. Hundreds of people have weighed in. Frankly, we don't get that on our budget, and that's $1 billion plus item. So I guess, did they ever say anything like, in the future, we're really going to work on the Metroplex thing. We're really going to take citizen input into account. Not saying you shouldn't count what the airlines say, not saying you shouldn't take safety into consideration. Obviously, they run the, you know, the FAA runs the routes and everything. Did they indicate anything at all that that's going to be more of a priority in any kind of future dealings with them?
Well, Mayor, Councilman Waring, the two things I would share is that if we did agree to an alternative here, they did commit, even if they did a categorical exclusion, they would do community outreach for this, which I think is promising, that they now recognize the need to communicate with our community. And they have also already committed with the Metroplex process to do the same. In fact, in this Metroplex initiative, we have a deadline to provide public comment. We've already done.
April 27th, right?
April
For those
27th,
watching
that's
at home,
correct,
April 27th.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure those people aren't wasting their time. I've encouraged citizens to participate in that. But given the way this has gone, you know, I wouldn't blame them for being skeptical about whether that's going to produce.
And on the Metroplex process, the city would request that everybody consider asking the FAA to do a formal public scoping session on the front side of the EA process or the environmental process, and not wait for the FAA to produce results and then just see what the public thinks of those results. That's what we'll be demanding, and that's what we'll be asking the community to demand as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Please continue. I think we're almost done with the presentation. We'll get
Almost
to
done.
public comment. I appreciate it very much.
Mayor, members of council, on April 14th, the FAA did send you a letter, and the city manager and you a letter of the alternatives that we discussed just now. That letter has been posted on skyharbor.com/flightpaths for any member of the public that would be interested in reviewing it. In the letter, the FAA expressed their disappointment in the city for not providing alternatives for the FAA to consider. We reject that comment, as we did provide alternatives, two of which the FAA chose not to consider or include in its report of alternatives. After reviewing the draft report, it doesn't appear to us that the FAA seriously considered the input they received from us and the thousands of people who are impacted by this. They ruled out any alternatives that move flight tracks from the current path, citing that the move would not meet program objectives regardless of the noise benefit. This provided the city with little incentive to provide additional alternatives for the FAA to consider. The FAA also noted in its letter that per the FAA policy, the city is responsible for managing the noise issues the FAA imposed on the community. The city openly and willingly accepts this role, and we have done so for many years. In fact, the city has spent decades in planning, investing in appropriate land uses for our community to ensure compatible development around previous flight paths. And as the city manager noted in his December letter to the FAA, the Aviation Department has invested over $300 million in federal and local funds to provide assistance and services to noise-impacted communities close into the airport. However, we categorically disagree with the notion that it's okay to move a highway in the sky with no public input, and then to suggest the city is responsible for cleaning up the mess that's left behind. He suggested the FAA look into establishing voluntary agreements with the airline and developing community roundtables. We absolutely agree and are already looking at doing that. He also suggested that the FAA offer to provide assistance to the noise office to help with messaging to the public on different concerns they might have with the community, and suggested the FAA is willing to provide support and is open to this city providing additional solutions to the FAA, although we don't know what benefit that will bring. And so I just wanted to speak briefly about the identified RNAV benefits here. And so the FAA in their report, the alternatives report that is on our website now, indicates that the routes implemented on September 18th reduced an average of 3.5 nautical track miles per flight for all configurations. This reduction has the effect of saving the airlines approximately $3.6 million in fuel per year based on fuel prices today. The report further identified that reverting back to previous west routes would reintroduce approximately 4,300 metric tons of CO2 into the Phoenix metropolitan airspace. But to understand really what this means in kind of our terms, we asked the city's Office of Environmental Programs if they could help us understand that, and they indicated it would be the equivalent of adding 700 vehicles to the region's roadways. And in fact, that addition would amount to 0.06% of total emissions to the west side of Central Avenue every year. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Fisher to talk about what the city is planning to do to engage the community and move forward. Ms. Fisher.
Thank you, Chad. So we have about 6 items here. While we certainly would never recommend ignoring an open door to continue working with the FAA, we think there's many other things that we can be working on simultaneously and should undertake those actions immediately. And the first thing on the list is community engagement. The FAA established a working group to evaluate alternatives. The airlines, who are a very important partner in this, were at the table, and I think we under your leadership, Mayor and Council, made very good use of our seat at the table, but the community did not have an opportunity to participate. Community members who have some pretty tremendous expertise. So we're going to look at, and we would recommend looking at, organizing the community in a way that works better for us, based on the practices of other cities and other airports. We'd like to return to the City Council shortly and make a recommendation for how we can organize our community to better participate and engage with us in evaluating these alternatives. The airlines are a very important partner in this. Our success at Sky Harbor depends on the business success of our airline partners. As was mentioned earlier, the FAA has been working with the airline stakeholders for quite some time in establishing these processes and also in looking at the alternatives. We're ready to continue our partnership with the airlines and work with them in a different way because so far the FAA process has not produced a meaningful result for our community. So we'd like to partner with our airline partners at the highest level and ask what they can do on a voluntary basis to help mitigate the noise issues. We visited American Airlines and Southwest Airlines at their corporate headquarters over a week ago, and with your leadership and support, we'd suggest continuing that dialogue at the highest level. We'd like to unite with other cities to learn more about best practices. This Friday, we have a meeting with Arizona airport leaders tomorrow from Tucson, Mesa, Scottsdale, Glendale, the city's 3 airports and others. We've talked to Portland, Boston, Minneapolis, Chicago, Las Vegas, and others with similar issues to resolve. We'd like to unite with those airports also through our trade organizations and establish best practices and support each other in dealing with this issue. We'll continue to lobby to get the FAA to do the right thing for our community, with the airlines, with the Department of Transportation, Congress, the White House, and the National Historic Preservation Office. We encourage engaging in the Metroplex process. This will be a more robust environmental review process. We need to take advantage of that opportunity to participate in a public way. We'll provide comments by the April 27th deadline. We have sent letters to community members who've participated in this process, along with our council members and school district superintendents and other Arizona airports, encouraging them to comment. We will be recommending or requesting from the FAA that the comment period be extended, and we'll be asking for a public scoping process as a part of that process, which to this point is not included. And then lastly, we are already working, as you know, last year we received just over 200 complaints total from over about 40 households. Now we are in the neighborhood of about 8,000 complaints, and we certainly don't have the resources or weren't prepared to staff that at the beginning of this process. We are creating a more robust noise management function at Phoenix to manage both the high volume of complaints, but also to better engage with the community on this topic. We've recommended new staff that are more sophisticated and have more experience with airspace issues or more expertise on airspace issues. And we hope to achieve an additional 3 positions that would be effective in July. We also are looking at reorganizing for enhanced and focused leadership at the airport on this topic and noise management issues. And in the meantime, we'll be augmenting staff with consultant resources. So in summary, we believe that the FAA really did not consider alternatives that would provide meaningful relief to the community, although we will continue to work with them and try to achieve better results. We believe that the stated benefits of the new flight paths and the new technology do not outweigh the tremendous cost in terms of quality of life that this has had on our community. The city, we believe, was not treated in a way that we expected as a result of the letter that we received from Administrator Huerta, that we would work together to look at ways to manage noise issues. And so, Mayor and Council, we're here today to recommend that we discontinue the PBN working group or the FAA working group. We would continue to work with them as partners, but not in that forum. We would like to renew our request with the FAA to revert to the previous routes using today's technology, and we would like your support for staff to aggressively pursue the 6 points that I had just outlined.
Mayor, members of the council, that represents staff's presentation. We're certainly available to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. We have many members of the public who are here to provide input on the information they've heard here today, including the proposed recommendation from our professional staff. So why don't we go to cards first, and then we'll have the opportunity for council to provide additional comments and see if there is any action this council wants to take. I first want to acknowledge Congressman Gallego has been a great friend and champion on this very difficult issue. There's been consistent leadership from obviously Congressman Pastor previously, and now Congressman Gallego, and he's organized other members of Congress. We very much appreciate that. His chief of staff is here, David Montes. His chief of staff from Washington, D.C. is actually here, so we appreciate you being here. And Monica Sandschafer, our friend, his community outreach director is also here. Monica, I don't know if you wanted to provide the first public testimony on this item. I do have a card for you, please. Up to 2 minutes.
Is this the right microphone? Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to speak. And again, thank you to all the community members who are here and who've worked so tirelessly on this issue. Congressman Gallego submitted a statement, or published rather a statement today on this issue that I wanted to share with you all. He released the statement. The alternate routes proposed by the FAA do very little to solve the problem of aircraft noise that is causing such severe disruption to the lives of citizens of the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. The FAA needs to take this seriously. There are real life, health, and environmental consequences to this amount of noise and stress in our communities. It's time that the FAA come up with a real solution that addresses the problem and takes into account the input and effects on the lives of the citizens of Phoenix. The City of Phoenix has been working with the FAA to find a solution. Rather than pointing fingers, the FAA should stick to their deadlines, assume responsibility, and act quickly to find a solution. I stand with my constituents, and I am committed to finding a resolution to this problem. That is his statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please pass on our appreciation to our congressman. Next, I have Glenn Hammond. I know someone has also provided you time. So, Glenn, did you want to provide testimony next, followed by Brent Kleinman?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Judy Batzine from Woodland, who can't be here today due to her work with disenfranchised youth, has asked me to speak on her behalf, and then I have some comments following that. So I'll read what she wants me to share.
Please.
Dear councilpersons and participants at this meeting, living in the vulnerable historic community of Woodland, 2 blocks from the state capitol, and in the opposite direction, 2 blocks from the city's largest homeless shelter, we are experiencing severe adverse quality of life effects. This is due to the FAA flight path changes originating out of Sky Harbor on September 18th. These flights were monitored for flight noise and frequency on my home in late February. Results over a 4-day time frame of documentation clearly indicate that local neighborhoods are expecting the highest noise, that local neighborhoods are experiencing the highest noise recordings, 1,500 flights a day, with approximate 28-second intervals between aircraft and is flying as low as 750 feet in altitude. It appears there is no urgency by the FAA, who clearly violated our due process of law, to be engaged in any community conversation before the changes were implemented, and with no testing performed to determine holistic effects upon the residents from this national government action. We are requesting your assistance to regain our right to live free from this invasive intrusion upon our activities of daily living. Thank you. Judy Batzine, Woodland Avenue in Woodland. I have some comments that I would like to share today as well.
Please.
Just excuse me for a moment. In regard to the CADX I wanted to try to get a little clarity with that. This really all started with Congress passing the legislation to implement NextGen, and then from there, from my understanding, from there, the FAA had said that it would be difficult for them to implement in certain cities, and so Congress issued them further legislation, or a hall pass, if you will, to implement the CADX. And so that when we look at this problem, it really starts with Congress. I have somewhat of a different opinion here. I read the letter as well from the FAA, and I think at least the spirit of that letter seems to be that they want to have community involvement and that they were trying to work with the community as well. But there was, the community wasn't involved in the PBN work group as far as residents were concerned. And so with that in mind, I would encourage the city and council to continue its exploration of legal action over the next few days, several weeks, and allow for that 20-day window that the FAA is offering to the community to seek a solution with modifying the offending flight paths. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hammond. Mr. Brent Kleiman, is next, followed by Nicole Marquez.
Good afternoon. It's always a fun day when I can come down here and listen to some airplane talk for a few hours. I've got a couple points I've got to kind of bring out and ask questions about and see if the people from the airport can answer them or the city council.
Please.
I know we've spoken about the potential for a lawsuit and you guys going back into executive session and making that decision. There has been a lot of speak about the FAA walking away if you file that lawsuit. Can you answer the question, do you believe that's going to happen? Whether or not they will get up and say, we're not dealing in good faith anymore? Excuse me. Also, their suggested change of the Northwest 2. Speaking to as many people as I've tried to speak to in the last 24 hours, it seems that there's a fallacy in their plan that there's a potential for increased altitude, reduced speed. It just doesn't logistically make sense that that's a possible alternate solution, let alone the lack of change on noise. I appreciated hearing from you all that we're going to try working directly with the airlines. With neither of them being hubbed in Phoenix anymore, I still believe we're one of the top revenue generators for both the U.S. Airways side of American and definitely Southwest Air. So whatever pressure the city and state can put on that, I think would be greatly well used. And then lastly, what influence does the city and possibly some of our more Republican city council members, Mr. DiCiccio, Mr. Waring, Mr. Gates, have pull with the senators in our state to get them more actively involved? So my goals are, I guess, threefold.
I'll answer that.
And I will allow my beep to go and let you guys answer the questions the best you can.
Thank you very much.
all
I think the
much.
first question should be answered. The question to do with Northwest second alternative, correct, Mr. Kleiman?
Yes.
Okay, and the issue, I think the staff's analysis is that that alternative, which is one of the few alternatives that the FAA was willing to consider looking further into, our professional analysis utilizing our consultant was that that would not provide the relief to the residents that the I'm not sure the FAA representative would, but they at least wanted to explore. So maybe you can drill down a little bit more on Northwest 2 to answer Mr. Kleiman's question.
And Mayor, if I might, I'd ask our airspace expert, Tom Cornell, to address that question. Thank you.
Okay. With the Northwest 2, the issue is to increase the altitude, or basically specify a minimum altitude and then put a speed restriction with the anticipation that aircraft would be flying higher along the path. The FAA was not able to define what altitude would go up by over that area, or if the aircraft would just maintain, the aircraft that are currently over 4,000 to 5,000 feet would just stay at those altitudes, and just the ones that were lower, that 7% on the north turn, that those aircraft would go to that new altitude. The request was made, at the last meeting, is could that information be provided as to what they believe the noise benefit would be on that. Part of the issue is it's not going to stop the overflight issue. There's still going to be overflights. It could reduce, have some reduction in noise, but not at the levels that, where the noise would be going away, per se.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I think to kind of just in a nutshell, just say it could have a minor benefit. Again, only about 7% of the aircraft on that route per the FAA document are flying below that assigned altitude. This would potentially get them above the restricted altitude. That means there's 93% of those planes that are already flying at or above that altitude without any incentive to fly higher, so we don't see that as having a dramatic effect to the community.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kleiman, does that answer your question as it relates to Northwest 2?
Somewhat. I know the point at which they measure that is basically Indian School and Grand Avenue. And my understanding, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is typically on a takeoff, once a plane hits 1,000 feet, they're able to lower their thrust engines. And in this process, to try to climb at a quicker rate, they would not lower their thrust engines, which would in turn actually cause more noise rather than less noise.
All right, so I don't know if that was a possibility as part of the analysis done as it relates to Northwest 2.
Mayor and Council, is my understanding, and Tom can correct me if I'm off base here, but we did not get that data, that modeling data from the FAA, so we don't know definitively how they expect the airplanes to fly that route. However, it is accurate that when you have a speed restriction, that the thrust settings, instead of it going towards forward movement of an aircraft, it's going to vertical movement of that aircraft. So ultimately, the planes will fly a little bit higher. They're going to fly slower, though, as well as they go over the communities.
All right, thank you very much. I don't know if that answers that portion of the question.
Yes, you did.
Mr. Kleiman, I'll do the best, at least from my perspective, to answer the question as it relates to possible litigation against the FAA. Obviously, we won't know in advance what their response would be to such litigation. So we can't speak in advance about whether or not they would then no longer provide effective communication with the city. I can only say that it would be an incredibly poor choice if they did, because the city is involved in innumerable lawsuits for various reasons, usually on the defensive end of those such lawsuits. And our goal is to try to figure out the most reasonable solution as a result of that litigation. And so the only way to reasonably settle a dispute that results in litigation is to continue to communicate. Any litigation that would be filed by the City of Phoenix would be nothing personal against any public official at the FAA. It's just that we have a serious dispute with them as to the actions that they took that had such a negative impact on the lives of citizens of the City of Phoenix. So my expectation would be that if we end up in a litigation situation with the FAA, that would not cut off communication, but rather would potentially actually enhance communication, because I think both sides would have a duty to try to resolve that dispute. So I, at least as mayor of the city, my belief would be that they would not cut off communication as a result of any litigation. It certainly would be a counterproductive decision if they did. Councilman Waring wanted to offer his thoughts as to the relationship with the Republican members of our delegation, including our senators.
Thank you. I am a Republican, but I think I can assure you, on behalf of the Republican members of the delegation, they would work with any of these folks up here, Democrat or Republican. I can illustrate what I mean by that in a second. You asked specifically what I have done. A letter was drafted. I believe it was on behalf of the City of Phoenix. I do not have the letter in front of me. I apologize, but perhaps you guys could get this to Mr. Is it Kleiman?
Kleiman.
Yeah, Kleiman. Mr. Kleiman, Paul, or Tammy. But so in any case, I was asked I guess in my Republican liaison role, to speak with the senators, and so I did. Spoke with their offices. Steve Voller, Congressman Flakes, or excuse me, Senator Flakes, Chief of Staff, is actually a constituent in my district, known him for years. So I hand-delivered a letter to him. Senator Flakes signed it, basically paraphrasing the FAA to reconsider. Effectively, Senator McCain hand-delivered that letter. He also signed. There was a request from Councilwoman Pastor and Councilwoman Gallego to meet with Senator McCain when they were back in Washington. I wasn't there, but I can tell you, certainly this request was enthusiastically embraced by the senator's office. I had so much email traffic from 3 different Senate staffers about this to set up the meeting, which I think was done on 24 hours notice. I believe you guys both had the meetings, right? And Senator McCain attended himself. I know he met with you, right?
Yes, you are correct.
Yes, so he met, see, reaching across that aisle, met with Councilwoman Pastor. I also spoke with David Schweikert's state director here, and also his, he has an airplane. I don't know what his official title is, and I'm sorry, I forget the gentleman's name because I had not met him before. I spoke with him extensively about this issue. I know Congressman Schweikert has had meetings with his constituents, as I think I mentioned earlier, as have I. But he has met with his constituents. I think the last meeting he had was maybe Monday night. But in any case, so the 3 that are in sort of my area and the 2 senators, certainly have spoken with them. I'm now kicking myself because I spoke with Congressman Salmon just socially for about 20 minutes on Friday, and I neglected to mention it. But if memory serves, he has also weighed in at some level. I thought I had been told that. Sorry I did not bring it more closely to his attention. I thought he had signed a letter or done something, but that was not through my efforts. But in any case, so I hope that answers your question. You know, they certainly have weighed in and participated. So.
Thank you very much. Ms. Marquez, would you wish to provide testimony on this item, followed by Mr. Robert Parra?
Mayor Stanton, Council. I just wanted to cover a few items. We already had my paper circulated, so you're pretty much aware. 153,000 minutes. That's half of 7 months, of which the citizens of Phoenix, Arizona have had to endure airplanes over the top of our houses. Now, I know the FAA is concerned for their program, and I know the city of Phoenix is concerned for their citizens, but also for the situation with aviation. One thing that we've discussed before was the concern for the citizens. And I know it's easy to sit here and say, you know, we're concerned, we care, we're pissed off, those things. But we need immediate relief. While all of these arguments are happening, it's still happening right over our houses. And so I appreciate the fact that you're doing everything that you can, but we need to intercede on behalf of our citizens and find a solution, not just in the long term, but also in the short term, because it's insane. Airlines are basically putting a price tag on our lives. They're putting a price tag on the quality of our lives. And this is a slap in the face to anyone that has to endure this. And so I just wanted to make that statement that I don't think it should be profit above people. I think it should be people above profit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marquez. Robert Parra is next, followed by Reuben Henderson III.
Hello, I'm Robert Parra, Grant Park Community. Grant Park, I hear this historical neighborhood. Well, Grant Park is a historical neighborhood. It's very rich in history, if anybody wants to check it out. Okay, our community, Phoenix South, we get most of the noise, and it's really irritating, you know, that they want to keep bringing all this traffic through our neighborhood. And what I'm having a problem is that that community has always been Hispanics. And we never have a say on anything. And I think that you should hear us out, because for many years, we have been disrespected for generations. A lot of us in that community were third generation Mexican American. A lot of our relatives came from World War II and did not have an American Legion to go to because they weren't allowed. They built their own. While I was growing up, we were treated as second-class citizens. To police officers, we were all called Pancho. It's hard when you've lived. Look at me, Mayor. I'm sorry, I just want you to listen to me. It gets frustrating because nobody listens to us. To us. We are people just as well as anyone else. And, you know, a lot of us in that community were, in that age, we're baby boomers. We only have about 10, 20 years left here on earth. And I'm asking you, please, let us live the rest of our years in peace. And at least take a little bit of that noise away, some of it. Please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parra, for taking the time to come down. Ruben Henderson is next, followed by Eva Olivas.
I have only a very few things to say. Number one, based on all the information that I have at this point, the ambient noise for people in the South Mountain area is about 55 decibels. At 2:30 in the morning, 2:30 a.m., the airplanes fly over my home, and I'm certain that they're flying over my home at 75 decibels. And my only comment is, sue the FAA, sue the FAA, sue the FAA.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson, for those brief and to-the-point remarks. Eva Olivas is next, followed by Connie Gandoria. Ms. Olivas, did you wish to speak? I apologize. Is she still here? She may have had to leave. Connie Gandoria, are you still here? I know it's a long meeting, so some people may have to leave. How about Jolifin Sodari? Mary Hudson, did you wish to speak? Please come forward, and then followed by William Trumbo. Thank you for coming.
Hi, I want to thank you for representing us. I am your epitome of a soccer mom who is completely uninvolved with our government and our civics goings on, and this has brought me to the point where I am now standing in front of a microphone. So I am representing the Northeast District, which has been duly impacted by not only Sky Harbor's traffic, which is now directly flying over my home, but also now it's impacted Scottsdale Air Parks, which has now increased the traffic over my home as well. I am waking up to the traffic at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm waking up 6 o'clock in the morning when the alarm goes off. I'm going to bed with the traffic, and it's just disrupted our lives. We used to be able to sit out on the patio and have dinner after a long day of school and work, and we're no longer able to do that. So first of all, I would like to give props to the Historic District for really keeping this going. And we are now on board as well in the Northeast. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hudson, for your testimony. Please come forward and state your name for the record.
Right.
Mr.
My name is William Trumbo. I live in the Encanto Palmcroft area. I bought a historic home because I understand historic homes are protected from actions from the federal government. And that's the way the federal law is. But apparently, in Phoenix, Arizona, that doesn't apply anymore because the Federal Aviation Authority can come in. So I think we should be careful of the Orpheum Theater and some of our others because the federal government could come in and decide they want to build something else there or do something, and we have no control on what's going on in our government. So I'd like to say that I'm very disappointed of what we've been able to do, and I strongly recommend that we don't fund the airport so they can collect more complaints from 8,000 more households and staff up because the complaints aren't doing any good, nor it seems like. So I would suggest you take the money that you're going to give to the airport and hire lawyers and file a lawsuit. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Trumbo, for your testimony. I very strongly suggest, I appreciate the clapping, the sentiment in favor of the speakers, but it's very important that we keep decorum here at the meeting, so we want to get each of the speakers an opportunity to present their information. I think the council hears loud and clear the gist of the testimony. Ms. Ginger Maddox is next, followed by Richard Gayer. Ms. Maddox.
You were talking about federal action, and the answer to the question is, if we had a new federal action, yes, they could invoke categorical exclusion. I have discovered that there are two types of categorical exclusions, not just CADEX 1 or CADEX 2, which has never been passed, but there's also the regulatory CADEX, and there is the legislative CADEX. For the life of me, I've been trying to get a good definition on the legislative, but I do know what the regulatory is, and they do have to meet a certain criteria within the noise contour maps. If they don't meet that measurement, then they can invoke the CADEX. Legislative CADEX, they don't have to meet that recipe, and I believe that's what's happened here. And I believe it's the first time that it's happened in the country. So if you can dig up more information on the legislative, I can't find anything. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the summary that is published once a year by Director Orta on the NextGen. It usually comes out in August, and it doesn't cover everything. There's actually 35 sections to NextGen. The summary just covers what's going on at the moment. And when I was preparing my first presentation for our first public meeting, there were 3 goals in PBN. The third goal was noise mitigation. And I remember that because when I told the audience that they were going to like this, and then I said reduction in noise mitigation, we all laughed. Now, I'm not really sure, without going back to my notes, whether this is a reduction in per engine or per event, or if it's the DNL average. I'd have to look at that. But that is one of their goals. Thirdly, I looked into what is called the 1050.1E, Change 1. Section 11 talks about historic properties, archaeological landscapes, and in 1 through 5B, number 3, it states in there, now this is policy and procedure for FAA, that if a project is under implementation or has already been established, and you find that there are consequences, unexpected consequences due to that project, they are required to change that. And I believe that there are more than 11 sections in this document, but I believe that really that's where our legal rights can stand. Thirdly, the gentleman who talked about Grant Park, in environmental justice, there is definitely a section in there that talks about disenfranchised historic districts, and to me, what he talked about would definitely qualify for that. So as we move forward with this, I think that we do have policy and procedure legs to stand on without having to go to a full-blown lawsuit. There are things that they need to comply with because this is already the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maddox. Without giving away what our litigation strategy might be, you can fairly well bet that if, in fact, this results in litigation, and we will certainly make the argument that the appropriate policies and procedures weren't followed and need to be followed, and that will be part of the relief that will be asked for by the city. Chaz, you did mention two types of categorical exclusions. And I don't know if we have information relative to that. I think the key point is that regardless of which categorical exclusion was utilized, there still had to be an assertion by the FAA that there would not have a negative impact on the community in order to utilize either one. But I don't want to mischaracterize.
No, Mayor, that is correct. In fact, the CADX 2 that Ms. Maddox referred to is specifically written in Public Law 112-95. And it does require the administrator to do an assessment for extraordinary circumstances, and if they exist, they are required to do further environmental review. So that there is that process that the FAA must follow.
Thank you. Mr. Richard Gayer, did you wish to provide testimony? Followed by Russ Cousins, followed by Mike March. Mr. Gayer, good to see you.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I live in the Willow Historic District, a half a block from 7th Avenue in the northern section. I oppose the new flight paths because of intolerable noise over FQ Story that I experienced yesterday. But regarding all the talk about litigation, I have a comment from a neighbor who I see maybe once a month, and I'll just read it. It says, the previous flight paths were over relatively poor neighborhoods, including the area around 27th Avenue between West Van Buren and West Buckeye Road, where people do live. The new paths are over relatively wealthy neighborhoods, like Willow and FQ Story, whose residents are now complaining about lost property values, among other things. By returning to the former flight paths, you may be accused of discriminating against poor people in violation of their right to equal protection. That defense could be raised with anybody who had standing, perhaps the people in the area. The foregoing is not my position. The noise over FQ Story is intolerable, quite apart from property values. The person I'm talking about here would be too shy to make a presentation. We both live in the Willow Historic District. The precise locations are not important. It's a tiny district. Neither of us are annoyed by the noise. My partner and I, he's 75, I'm 76. We listen to the TV at 60 dB SPLC weighted, and we have no need to turn up the volume, not even when we open the windows. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gayer, very much. Russ Cousins is next, followed by Mike March, followed by Simon Wheaton Smith. You have up to 2 minutes to provide testimony, but you are not required to use the full 2 minutes if you do not wish. Good to see you.
Hi. My name is Russ Cousins. I live in Fairview Estates. I've talked to most of you people, all your representatives, multiple times. I've probably sent 800 to 900 emails. I'm sure that you people are sick of it. So am I. This is my 13th meeting. I'm wondering how many more I'm going to have to come to. I'm hoping no more, but I'm sure that that would be just a hope. I would hope that whatever your decision is about the lawsuit, I'm hoping that's going to go forward, but whatever you do, that's not the only approach that you take. That you do, in fact, because I was under the opinion that you were thinking the airlines were good guys because of funding. I don't think they're good guys. This is all about money. That's the only thing that's involved here is money. And they're the ones that are getting the money, and we're the ones that are suffering. So how could they be a good guy? Sure, they're making a lot of money for the city, but they're not helping us a bit. And I've requested my employees not to travel out of Sky Harbor anymore and not to use Southwest Airlines at all. And I've requested my employer to do the same, and he has 1,600 employees. So I'm hoping that they will continue to do that. They've done it for 3 months now. I'm sure if it's done for a long enough period of time, it'll make a difference. As far as the FAA goes, I don't know that they're such a bad guy, because I'm sure Glenn Martin doesn't have any control over what's going on here whatsoever. That everything that's being done is out of Washington. So, you know, I've talked to him several times. The last time, he didn't even know Grand Avenue went at an angle. So he's not into this at all. I mean, he has got no idea what goes on here. When I called him from my house, he said I should have no problem at all because I'm 1.5 miles to 2 miles from Grand Avenue. He said, you shouldn't have an issue whatsoever. Well, I went to my porch, and I put up the phone, and I said, what do you think? He said, I'll call the tower and see what's going on. I never heard from him again. So the FAA, in effect, haven't been out to see what's going on. I know you have. I'm really proud of you for going to Nicole's house. I think that was a good step. I really like that, as a matter of fact.
Thank you. We have a short period of time for each. We give it just 2 minutes, and the buzzer went out, so as quickly as possible to finish your testimony.
Okay. What I've noticed that affecting here is, and I'll be done after this, is that I've been there in 26 years in Fairview Estates, and out of the 26 years, it's been very difficult, except for the first 5 or 6 years, because it was basically a slum, to get even a house there. Now, there are houses for sale every place, and not just Fairview Estates. And the flippers are buying the houses, and the flippers are not reselling the houses anymore. The flippers are renting houses. And if you know as well as I do, once flippers get involved with housing and you get into rentals, things go downhill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cousins, for your testimony. And we do get your emails as well, and we appreciate them.
Can I ask a question based on what he said?
Councilman Waring has a brief question.
For our staff, regarding about the airport, I mean, they're not nonprofits. We all know they're trying to make money. They do not get to set their own routes, though. It's the FAA that does that. So without the FAA, sort of, I view their role as a little bit of a judge. You know, they should be looking at what the citizens in the city needs, they should be looking at what airlines need, and they should apply safety over all of it. I mean, really, they're the ones who set this up, correct? I just want to make sure that people aren't mad at the wrong people.
Mayor, Councilman Waring, the FAA has exclusive control over the airspace.
It is absolute, is it not?
They have absolute control over the airspace. They do consult with the airlines and the industry, of course, to ensure that the routes they propose are flyable.
Right, and we're mad because they didn't consult with us, basically, but, okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
Mr. March, good to see you, followed by Simon Wheaton-Smith, and followed by Dale Taylor. Good to see you.
Okay, just a few quick things. First of all, goes without saying, overall has gotten worse since September 18th to now. Noise is worse, frequency of flights. So just in general, you know, I'm going to say that hopefully not more, but every meeting it is getting worse. So that's the first thing. Also, when we're talking about like blame and who we blame, I'm not one. People know me. I'm not one to rail against the federal government, but in my experience this whole time in like dealing with all the entities, the FAA definitely seems to be the worst of a bureaucratic, technocratic organization that is willfully being ignorant and ignoring us. So just from my point of view, for what that's worth. But my two things I want to ask are, first of all, question is, the roadmap for a lawsuit. Has a city ever successfully sued the FAA for this kind of noise issues, and has ever won? That's my first question ever. And I know every situation is different. And two, this is very anecdotal, but it seems like a zillion houses in my neighborhood have gone up for sale recently. And I don't know what the causality is, but is the city tracking that kind of stuff? It's very early. It's only been 8 months, but it just seems weird. Like, it could be me. They don't want to be near me, whatever. But is the city tracking that kind of stuff and just seeing if home values are going up or down? It just seems kind of weird. It seems to be going crazy. And I think that those are my two questions: roadmap of the lawsuit, and has a city ever gone through this process successfully, and home sales. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the issue of relative tracking of home sales, I think we actually, as a city, I don't know if we have a formal process to do so, but it's obviously very, I wouldn't say easy to track, but we know where home sales, we can compare it to previous years. We can track volume of home sales compared to previous times. We could also track volume of home sales versus other similarly situated neighborhoods. So I think that information will be able to be received by the community. In terms of successful dispute resolution with the FAA, I don't, every dispute tells its own story, but, is the FAA 100% successful in disputes they have with communities, or do we have success stories where communities have had disputes with the FAA and it's worked out in a way that the community felt satisfaction? If we don't, it's okay. It was a question that was asked. I want to make sure we give it our reasonable best shot as to an answer. Please.
So, Mayor, members of council, generally, it's my understanding that the standard under which the FAA, the courts give incredible deference to the FAA. Essentially, we have to show that they were arbitrary and capricious. That being said, I understand from the council with which we are working that there have been a few successful cities across the country that have challenged the FAA. But generally, the courts have been deferential to the FAA, and so many of those formal legal actions have not been successful. That being said, as you note, there are other successful strategies, and litigation is just part of that.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Simon Wheaton-Smith, followed by Dale Taylor, followed by John Hinz. Mr. Wheaton-Smith, good to see you.
Mayor, council, and staff, my name is Simon Wheaton-Smith, Palmcroft. I was formerly a FAA inspector. I retired from there, where I was certified for inspection, investigation, and enforcement. Prior to that, I flew the 737 for a major air carrier and other air carriers before that. My word's going to be slightly different from what I planned when I first came in here, because I've listened to Phoenix Aviation's presentation, and on the whole, I've learned something from them. I'm inclined much more now to support the idea of reverting, mainly because, Chad, the information you gave me on the speed and altitude restriction process, my caveat on that is there hasn't been a discussion on cutbacks. When I flew for the airlines, I have personally flown the deep cutback in Orange County. The words I would give you that would be relevant for Councilman Waring, the FAA, in my experience, and I've been on national as well as regional work groups, is a past master at delaying tactics. They are very good at being passively aggressive. So while I would strongly encourage delaying litigation to give one more chance to negotiation, I would also have a very rigid timeline. I would take control back from the FAA and say to the administrator, Huerta, this is what you said in the letter. We're going to give you 4 weeks. Now let's get down and talk about this stuff. And my only final comment is I have to strongly support your aviation department. My dealings with them have been very professional, and clearly they're very knowledgeable. Any help I can give, I will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wheaton-Smith. Your advice and analysis have been very helpful to this process. Thank you for support of our professional staff. Dale Taylor is next, followed by John Hinz, and then Opal Wagner.
My name is Dale Taylor, and I'm from the Westwood area. Our home is approximately a quarter of a mile from the Grand Avenue and Thomas Roads. We are experiencing probably a lot more noise than most of the people that are closer towards Central. And I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but since we've had the aircraft bombarding us in 3 waves every day, we've had several neighbors die, and some people said, well, they're getting old. Yes, but the other thing is we are suffering in the area from sleep deprivation, which is not good for most people's health, and this is across the counter. Children going to the school that's down the street are having a difficult time apparently because they're being interrupted in their classes, etc. But I'm not going to say any more because I would be repeating what a number of other people have said, and thank you very much for hearing us.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Hins, John Hins, followed by Opal Wagner, followed by Steve Dreisenson.
Yes, I am John Hines, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm a Phoenix native. Thank you very much for addressing this very important issue. Suppose for just a moment that you live in Sunny Slope and you work downtown and you drive 7th Avenue to get downtown, and then you do some calculations and you figure, hey, if I drive Central Avenue instead of 7th Avenue, I can save 2/10 of a mile. And you do it. And you realize it takes you 15 minutes longer to get there by your new route. I don't believe for 1 second that you can't revert to your previous plan. Likewise, as a retired electronic systems engineer, I do not believe for 1 minute that the FAA cannot revert to the plan it had in effect before September. In common law, everyone has a right to quiet enjoyment of one's property. And if our rights are violated, we are entitled to compensation. My proposal is that for every time an aircraft flies over, say, more than 50 decibels, so we can hear, and disturbs our quiet enjoyment, that they pay us some compensation. I would suggest $1 for each flight for each resident who's affected. You can accumulate this for the month, and at the end of the month, they can pay each of us the $1 per flight that they've had for each of their noisy aircraft flying over us. I voted for Raul Castro for governor because he promised leadership. I expected he would do things like protect Luke Field from encroachment and have a regional airport built somewhere in the vast space near Casa Grande with a bullet train between the 2 cities of Phoenix and Tucson. I think the money spent on Sky Harbor in that time would have more than paid for this.
Thank you.
We need to look better at our priorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hines. Ms. Opal Wagner, followed by Steve Dreisenson.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's been 7 long months now since we woke up or came home and found that there were aircraft flying over our heads, and we're now apparently part of this new flight path change at Sky Harbor. I think this community has been extremely patient in letting the city make its good faith effort to work through the process with the FAA. However, and it's extremely disappointing to hear how the PBN work group actually went, because a lot of us had pinned a lot of hopes on the success of that work group. But to now see, according to Congressman Pastor's words here, that it seemed like it was pretty doomed to failure from the start, and to see that they did not even consider noise mitigation as part of what they were considering, and that they consider it to actually be a perception problem. In my home in Central Phoenix, when the airport is on West Flows, I actually have to wear those little earmuffs that people wear at the shooting range to be able to live inside my own home, and that is certainly not the quality of life that I hoped for when I bought my home in Central Phoenix. I'm not an attorney. I don't know whether the city is better advised to work through that 2-month process that Mr. Glenn Martin offered in his letter, to have one last shot at coming to a solution, or whether the city is better advised to file a lawsuit right now, I would just ask you to please do whatever is the best course to get this aircraft noise and pollution off of us as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wagner. Mr. Dreisenson, followed by Marilyn Redone, I believe.
Mayor and members of the City Council and staff, my name is Steve Dreisenson. I'm a 40-year resident of the Efkey-Story Historic District. Like my good friend Simon, I came here expecting maybe to make different remarks than I'm going to make now. All this time and all this effort for 7 months, we have been concerned that we would make an emotional decision and sue before it was time. I no longer feel that way. I think any decision to sue should be strategic and should be well thought out. And what I've seen today is it appears that that is what's happening. There have been some great remarks by fellow residents, and I won't repeat them. But as I look at this, I am just shocked. We have spent more than $3.6 million in our effort to date, between the effort of our residents, between the effort of city and staff, between the consternation and everything else that has gone on. This is a false economy. This is a false efficiency. I think we only need to look at one issue. Would the original routes under RNAV be safe? And if they are, I strongly urge that that's the direction that we go for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dreisenson, from your leadership on this critically important issue from day one. I know you've put a lot of your personal time into this issue. Marilyn Redone, followed by Gwen Salon, followed by Lori Gonzalez. Good to see you.
I'm Marilyn Rendon. I'm the president of the Willow Neighborhood Association. I just wanted to clear up. I hear a lot of people saying that, well, Willow's not really affected. Actually, Willow is, so I wanted to make sure you knew that. And I really appreciate our city council and mayor and our staff. You're acting like people. And our aviation department, you're acting like people, and I can see that you care about this situation. I can see that you're mentally involved, you're emotionally involved, and you're really trying to solve the problem, and I appreciate that. And I'm very concerned, though, about our neighborhood. I mean, some people, we're all different, and some people can just switch something off and forget about it. I taught for 30 years. I can zone it out. But many people, you bring in noise or you bring in something else, and people can come completely unglued. And it doesn't surprise me. I mean, if something is allowed to be as loud as your conversation, that's just not something that should be happening in a private home. For an organization or an entity that is unable to change a flight pattern, they seem to be doing very well on a daily basis. Because I noticed that instead of the northwesterly direction they're going, I notice it's going more northeasterly direction, and they're coming closer and closer, but I mean by that being north, and they were going like this, now they're going like this, like this, like this. So they seem to be able to change, and I'm very disappointed. You know, I want to respect the FAA too. I want to respect everyone. And I'm disappointed that they didn't treat us with the same respect. And when they did that, and they said, well, you didn't really do a good job. Or, you know, when somebody's accusing me of something, I'm turning right around and looking at them and seeing what they're doing. And so when people don't negotiate in good faith, it tends to bite you later. And this is a very, very vocal, historically active downtown.
Thank you.
For us, this is creating instability. It's creating loss of productivity. You know, I never thought about the word FAA last August. Now, I think about the FAA every 2 or 3 minutes. Is that a good way to be thinking about our government? On the other hand, I'm thinking, oh, look, that plane's going over. Oh, the FAA. And then I'm thinking, oh, but the mayor's going to do something, or we're going to file a lawsuit. And then 3 minutes, we go through the same thing. You know, it's just kind of going ADD. So I just want to say that Willow will be concerned with making sure that our interests remain aligned.
Thank you.
If a lawsuit is filed, and that if there are any deadlines, we would like to be within a deadline to be able to do something. Thank you very much
Thanks so
for
much.
your time.
Thanks for your testimony. Ms. Lori Gonzalez, followed by Brad Allman, followed by Patricia Gillespie.
Mayor, council members, thank you for listening to us today. One of the speakers before me kind of hit on what I wanted to talk about. The health issues that we have not really addressed. Increases in cardiovascular disease, hypertension, strokes, coronary disease, all caused by exposure to air traffic or aircraft noise. The Partnership for Air Transportation Noise and Emissions Reduction, sponsored by NASA, Transport Canada, the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the FAA, have found that exposure to aircraft noise causes cognitive impairment in children and shortens all of our lifespans. I live in Levine. Underneath the flight path, there are 6 schools. All of these children are being impacted. I think it's more than just the noise that we all listen to every day. It's about our lives today and what our future will be 20 years from now when some of these illnesses start to impact us. Then I have a question actually for staff. As far as who requested this procedure, do we actually have real information on who that was? When did it start? When did they begin to embark on this procedure? And how long would it take if we asked them to request a different one?
Ms. Gonzalez, I appreciate those questions very much. I think the last part of it, they've tried to answer as thoroughly as possible in terms of depending on the various proposals, if it did have to go through an environmental process, the significant length of time that it would take. Relative to when the FAA first introduced this proposal, who they may have communicated with, that's been the subject matter of much discussion. I think it's fair to say that the FAA did not communicate in any effective way with the leadership of either Sky Harbor Airport nor the elected officials here at the city before moving forward with this procedure. That is the subject matter of a significant ongoing dispute between the city of Phoenix and FAA.
Not really the question. The question is more, okay, TRACON, working with an airline in 2009, had already embarked on the RNAV procedure that they wanted to implement in Phoenix. So that was like 6 years ago. So if we cannot solve this problem through the paths that we've taken or through a lawsuit, which I'm sure nobody wants to have to go to, why can't we ask the airline to request a different procedure?
Okay, and I think what you heard from staff is that we have a multi-pronged approach to solving this significant issue. One of those approaches is to work with the airlines to see if we can't do with private agreement what we might not be able to accomplish through the association with the process with the FAA.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brad Allman is next, followed by Patricia Gillespie.
Hello. I wanted to make a statement with regard to Ginger Maddox's query about legislative caddx. There was a legislative caddx that was findable on the internet via Google by searching under caddx 1 circa November, December of 2014. It has completely disappeared from the internet. It is no longer locatable or findable. I believe that is the legislative caddx that she was referring to. It was a short, approximately perhaps 10-page, I believe it was a PDF document, and very obviously and openly signed by John McCain. I have, from my reading of it, I didn't see that much distinction or anything special about it other than the noteworthy fact that it was signed by John McCain. I wanted to say that how would you say, we consider airlines and air traffic to provide a public benefit, that it's an important part of Phoenix's and other cities' economic engine. And that there's so much demand and projected demand for increased airport capacity that the FAA is going in and making all these new flight paths to have, by way of making provision for the future. And if there's so much economic demand, then there should be money, and there should be no need for private citizens, such as myself, to be subsidizing the air transport industry, and that's all.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your commentary. In defense of Senator McCain, I'm not sure whether he voted for the congressional action that allowed for the categorical exclusion, but as you heard from Congressman Pastor, who did say he voted for it, the intent of allowing the categorical exclusion was not to avoid accurate information to the public about the likely impacts on the community. They still had to provide accurate information. Obviously, in this case, accurate information was not provided, and so therefore, it is the opinion of myself, I think all the council, and certainly our staff, that a categorical exclusion was not appropriate for the next-gen changes here for Sky Harbor Airport. Gwen Salon, I passed you up earlier. I apologize. Did you wish to provide testimony? Gwen, and then followed by Patricia Gillespie.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say, after receiving the FAA report, I shared it out with a group that I'm participating in called the Our Skies National Coalition. It's a group of community members around different cities who have also been impacted by flight path noise, similarly to Phoenix. So just to let you know, the feedback coming back early this morning after they've read that report is what the FAA said about voluntary measures, collaboration, roundtables, is their standard response. Other cities have received that. They took it in good faith. Essentially, they were duped by the FAA. Those measures have not worked. So, years later, they're still dealing with the issues and all the roundtables and all the collaboration. And in fact, some of the cities are experiencing where the FAA won't collaborate with them at all. So, and voluntary measures are falling short as well. So, this seems not to work.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gillespie?
Mayor and fellow members of the council, thank you. I am an Arizona native. I do live in Willow. And I want to reiterate some of the things that have already been said. It's been my experience that in these meetings, if only one person is making a point, that point somehow gets lost in the issue. And the issue is very much about noise. It is very much about safety. It is very much about environmental impacts. Any information that we have on the previous flight paths and the impact from an environmental standpoint does not necessarily apply to what we're doing today, because these planes are in new paths at different altitudes. And to say that it is safer to go over a house than to go over a riverbed is perplexing. However, by the same token, we also have planes in different parts of the valley at different altitudes that they've ever been before. You've heard Scottsdale. There have been other meetings where Desert Ridge has been here. And it's important to keep in mind that the impact of anything, that what we set here in changing these flight paths or finding a modification to the flight paths needs to take into account that the next-gen operations have the planes performing and flying at altitudes and manners in which they haven't before. So the safety of historical flight patterns cannot necessarily be drafted into the safety of the environment for us in our houses. And we did have a near collision from what it appeared to be on the ground. I know that that's been investigated. It had to do with a smaller plane at a lower altitude and a commercial jet that was not flying at the right altitude. And from the perception on the ground was that those two planes were far too close. So it is definitely a safety issue. Can I say that again? A safety issue, and it's also an environmental issue, and it is also a noise issue. Not to mention the disclosure that did not happen to the residents in Arizona. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gillespie, for your comments. We have a large number of cards wishing to indication in favor of the proposed action, not wishing to speak. Many have comments on them. I'm going to submit them for the record, so they are part of our permanent record of this meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Councilman Nowakowski.
Mayor.
Can I just also, before you start, can I just submit a letter?
Yes.
From the Encano Citizen Association?
Please, and make sure the city clerk gets it so it's submitted as part of the record as well. Councilman Nowakowski, yes, I apologize.
Mayor, after listening and hearing, I mean, we've given the FAA all kinds of opportunities to sit down with our community. A lot of people were confused. Those meetings that we were having out there in the community were actually organized by our staff from Sky Harbor. And I just want to make that very clear. It wasn't the FAA reaching out to the community, listening to the concerns of the community, no. It was the City of Phoenix staff. It was our airport staff that was gathering this information. The individuals that went out there and put those monitors, it was ourselves trying to figure out and collect data if there was an interruption of noise and sound in our neighborhoods. And surprising, it did. It did increase. And I don't have faith with the FAA after sending a letter to our state's historic office saying that this wouldn't interrupt. It would just be like two individuals talking. It wouldn't interrupt a conversation over individuals. And later on, after the state's historic preservation office heard the complaints and the concerns from the residents of our historic areas, they rescinded that letter. How can we have faith in the FAA when they're saying that our congressmen for 20 years and our staff members sitting in that work committee submitting ideas and suggestions, and they turn out to say that they never did? It's wrong. How can we trust the FAA? Folks moved into our historic neighborhoods. They invested time, monies, and resources. People have moved into the Levine area for that rural feel. And all of a sudden, on September 18th, the worlds have changed. We've heard that testimony. It's wrong. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, the same situation happened right around the Sacred Heart community. We had 4 neighborhoods that were moved out. And now what we have is a church in the middle of nowhere. I don't want that to happen within the city of Phoenix after investing all that time and effort within our historic neighborhoods. You hear testimonies here today that people are moving out of our historic neighborhoods after investing thousands and thousands of hours and dollars into building these neighborhoods. Some of these neighborhoods are the best neighborhoods in the country, not in the state, not in the city, but in our country, where we have people that come down for spring training, and they come and they comment how beautiful our historic neighborhoods are, how they would love to move from the East Coast into these neighborhoods. They love the feel, they love the neighbors, they love the quietness. I believe that we need to bring back those neighborhoods to how they were back before September 18th. We need to look at our rural areas in the Levine area and bring it back to a quiet rural area as it was before. Some of the concerns I have is that I believe that we've taken it to the limit now. I'd really like to really go into an E-session and start talking about what's the next step in taking this into a process of some kind of legal matter. But at the same time, I believe that we have to engage with our senators. I know that Jim Waring has communicated with Senator McCain, but I think we need to take it even further than that. I really think we need to start having some strategic planning going on with our senators and our congressmen. I know that Congressman Ruben Gallegos has taken the leadership in that, but now we need to engage all of our congressmen and congresswomen and make sure that we have a strategic plan on how to address this issue. I believe we need to start looking at other cities that are being affected, just like us. and come together as a coalition. We need to be talking to Chicago. We need to go to Santa Cruz. We need to talk to Minneapolis and Boston and all the other cities that are being affected. And I ask my colleagues that we reach out to those members on those consuls and we start to come together to look at, to make sure that the FAA talks to the community before making these changes. I think we need to engage the airline companies and let them hear from us. We were basing everything on this working committee, and I think it's time for us to reach out to all these airlines and actually let them listen to our communities and let them listen to these testimonies and let us give them the data that we have gathered from all these community meetings and help and ask them for help. Folks, I'm tired. I'm tired of coming to meetings. I'm tired of listening to the same testimonies over and over and over again. It's not about South Phoenix. It's not about how we're endangering the minority community. It's not just about Levine anymore. It's not about downtown Phoenix. It's not about our historic district. We're hearing people from all the way from District 1, 2, and 3 that are complaining. This is affecting our whole city. It's not just a portion of our city. Something went wrong on September 18th, and we need to address that issue. And I feel the only way we can address it is legally addressing that. So if it was up to me, I would actually ask our staff that we need to go out there and sue the FAA and bring it back to where it was September 18th. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much for your comments, Councilman Nowakowski. Councilman Waring, did you have a comment?
I did, and I guess question for staff as well, airport staff. So I guess I'm frustrated, and I associated myself, or I'm going to associate myself with the comments of two citizens, one of whose name I forgot. So I apologize for that. One was, I believe her name was Opal Wagner. Is that right? I believe it's Opal, I think was one. So hopefully you know who you are. I see somebody nodding. 7 months, nothing's happened. I find that really hard to stomach and unacceptable. I do not blame people for being frustrated by that. Again, I wish we would have kind of moved more aggressively. I'm not surprised at the response we've gotten from the FAA. Again, the airlines, they're rational actors. They're trying to make money. If they spend less on fuel, you can't expect them to act any differently than they're going to act. I think the FAA, one of their suggestions is go to the airlines. Maybe they'll change. They're not going to spend more money just to make us happy. I mean, that's just not a realistic expectation. That sounds like passing the buck. And to Opal's point, if we go that route, we'll still be sitting here months from now with nothing to show citizens who we represent. Very frustrating. And I'm sorry, you're sitting over there, dark hair with the, yep, thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot your name, I apologize. Ms. Gonzalez? Ms. Gonzalez, you said. I think her point is, at least the way I interpreted at least some of her comments, what are we doing going forward? I'm frustrated with the FAA. Frankly, I've expressed this before, so this isn't a surprise. I'm frustrated with our airport staff. We spend a lot of money on consultants and lobbyists and everything else. And I think what we heard at the last meeting, December, I think it was 16th, was we either had 1 day notice about this or 2 weeks. It was a little unclear. The fact that it was unclear about how long we knew this is frustrating, given that I think Ms. Gonzalez's point was, it's kind of been in the works for years. This shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody. And I just can't express how disappointed I was that this got laid on us. I mean, as Councilman Nowakowski noted, my district shouldn't be at ground zero. I shouldn't really be hearing about airplane noise. There's not much, if anything, we can do about Scottsdale's airport. But if there's any ripple effect from this, and I'm now having meetings with 50, 60 people attending, where Councilman Gates and I can only get 20 people to talk about a $1.2 billion budget, I mean, that indicates it's an issue. It is affecting the entire city. It's extremely frustrating, and I didn't like to get caught flat-footed like this. Did we ever come up with how long we knew about this in advance, an actual date? Because it seemed vague the last time. Or is that still part of our internal?
I think it's under investigation.
Okay. I mean, again, people are getting paid too much money to look at this kind of stuff, to have this kind of being caught flat-footed. So, set aside the airing of grievances. What are we doing going forward to make sure during the Metroplex process or what else that we can keep citizens informed that their input is going to matter going forward What can we do to be more proactive with these future changes? Is there a process, or what are we going to do that's different next time? I think that was kind of to Ms. Gonzalez's point, at least in part.
Mayor.
So I think there was 6 recommendations that would, I think, fair to say that in addition to a litigation strategy, no one's suggesting that a litigation strategy would be the singular approach taken by the city. I think the recommendation of staff is to, well, I believe, I don't want to reveal what happened in East Session, but in terms of authority to sue, that may be a moot point as it relates to today, because it's probably already been given. But the discussion is, in addition to a litigation strategy, I think we did go earlier through those other suggested, and I think the staff's looking for us to give specific approval on those other strategies.
So much about this particular thing, just going forward, long-term relationship with the FAA. Tammy, I think you understood what I was saying. Apart from just this issue and maybe the more immediate future, what are we going to do so that 5 years from now, if there's changes, where are we going to be at with this? It's got to have a better relationship with the FAA than we got now when we didn't know this was coming, apparently.
Okay, I don't know if there's a good answer for that question about what we're going to do 5 years from now, but go ahead, Mr. Fisher, please.
I guess I would reject the premise that we shouldn't think about how we're going to handle this relationship going forward.
Certainly. Mayor Stanton,
Please.
Councilman Waring, we have given a lot of thought to how we will handle these situations moving forward. We have certainly put procedures into place to improve communications within the aviation department, and would hope that our relationship moving forward with the FAA is collaborative and productive. We are collaborating with other airport stakeholders in the Valley to make sure that we are talking to each other and are coordinated in our efforts to engage with the Metroplex process. The Metroplex process is different than the process that resulted in the RNAV procedures. It is an environmental assessment process. Sky Harbor and other airports and other stakeholders in the Valley received a letter from the FAA formally notifying us of their intent to begin the process and asking for our comment on the process. We are asking for a public scoping session. They have made the decision that they will not be doing any public scoping workshops going into this. We think that's a missed opportunity. And
just ask, what is
something
that?
we should do moving forward.
After Ms. Fisher completes her statement, then you may ask whatever question you want. Ms. Fisher, please.
So we are engaging in the Metroplex process. We are changing the way we manage our relationship and our communications within the aviation department, and would hope that that prevents. We are also working with members of Congress to advocate for language legislatively that would prevent the FAA from implementing such significant changes in a major metropolitan area without any consultation with the community that is to be affected.
I guess, and Mayor, I was not interrupting Tammy, it's just she's using so public scoping, what does that entail? I mean, they're taking emails, so
Typically,
is that a meeting, or?
Mayor Stanton and Councilman Waring, what we've received so far is a letter asking for us to submit written comments. In other processes, the FAA would actually hold community meetings where they would, in person, receive feedback from community members about how the process is going to take place before the process begins. That is not something they are planning to do in the case of the Metroplex, and so we are asking for them to consider doing that so that there is more collaboration with the public, with the community, before the process starts.
Can I ask a different question? So, and thank you for the explanation. So, going forward, if we were to engage in litigation with the FAA, what kind of relationships do we have? Does that hurt in other areas? Does that hurt us going forward in our relationship? I would hope not, but.
Let me try to address that if I might. Just by way of example, Sky Harbor Airport, City of Phoenix, was for many, many years in significant litigation with our airlines that fly in and out of Sky Harbor over the issue of some environmental issues. People can, while engaging in significant disputes, sometimes that result in litigation, they can still work together on other issues. We work very closely with those airlines on increasing flights in and out of Sky Harbor. At the same time, we were in significant litigation, some tough litigation, about the cost of environmental cleanup. I want to make sure I reiterate at least my thought on that. Anybody else can speak up if they feel differently, that this is a serious dispute that we have with the FAA. This is serious issues. It's very unfortunate what has occurred here that's so disproportionately impacted the lives of the citizens of Phoenix. But if, in fact, we end up in litigation, we will still have to work with the FAA every day to make sure that we still have an airport that is as safe as possible. The professionals at the FAA will not put at risk their role in responsibility as it relates to Sky Harbor Airport just as a result of this litigation. We have to solve this dispute. This dispute has to be resolved in a way that currently it's not on a glide path towards a positive resolution. But I believe strongly we can do that in a way and still have a very positive relationship on the many, many, many other issues that we'll have with the FAA moving forward as it relates to Sky Harbor.
Well, and you raised a point, is it a day-to-day relationship? I was concerned during Congressman Pastor's, and I didn't want to use up his limited time on this, but he referenced, I don't know, maybe you could even pull it up. So there was one map where he said something along the lines of, I don't know why they looked at this alternative, I think meaning we certainly wouldn't want that. It would go over even more houses than it did now, and they just sort of unilaterally threw that one in. For those who are familiar with the baseball term message pitch, it's an inside pitch to get the batter's attention. I'm concerned, if we do engage in a lawsuit, we got to look at all the costs, not just financial and so forth. I mean, why would they throw that in if not to say, things could get worse before they get better? We don't want that. It just seemed like a strange, in the context of what he said and the way it was presented, it just made me a little nervous. I will take it, Mayor Stanton saying our relationship will go on. I think that's your professional opinion. You were nodding, so I assume, you guys will work together and there won't be anything, we won't have any payback somewhere down the line. You're confident of that?
Mayor, Councilman Waring, I could say that we work extensively with the local team every single day. We have staff that go and work with them on an operational level with the aircraft on the ground, making sure that we have safe facilities. I don't anticipate that whatever the council decides to do, that will affect our relationship significantly affect our relationship with the local team. I think the dispute we have at hand is more of an issue between us and Washington, quite frankly, the agency in Washington, and I think that's where this type of discussion will be had.
I mean, it just, again, as the mayor pointed out, this is an extremely important issue. We've all highlighted it's affecting all our districts. This big of an issue with people you're working with every day, and you had very limited, it sounds like, notice about it. I hope the relationship improves. I'll just put it that way.
I concur.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate that very much. Look, the FAA gave what turned out to be inaccurate information to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport before this new departure procedure went into place. They indicated to us that it would not have the impact on the quality of life of the residents as it turned out to have. We don't know why they said that, and the assumption is that they may have believed it themselves, but they were wrong. It was a mistake. The categorical exclusion upon which that information was based should not have been granted. That's why the city took a very reasonable position, which is, since a mistake was made, go back to before the mistake and let's do it right this time around. They've taken a position that they can't do that because the categorical exclusion doesn't apply to fixing the dilemma. That is in part, that is the major point of this dispute between the city of Phoenix and the FAA. As part of the process that Congressman Pastor participated in, they were not looking at the noise impact on the neighborhoods. That's very unfortunate because the actions they took created this massive problem as it relates to quality of life and noise. Of course, in Phoenix, we care passionately about safety. We want efficient operations at the airport, and we want to do it in a way that minimizes the impact on the quality of life. We have operated an urban airport in the middle of a city for a long period of time with a very positive relationship with the FAA, with a very positive relationship with the airlines. We know how to do this. We know how to balance these interests. And unfortunately, I think that it's gotten out of balance, obviously so, with this decision. I think today, with the action leadership of Councilwoman Pastor and Nowakowski and the others on this council, we're saying we're drawing a line in the sand, and we're going to reestablish the right balance. We know how to run an airport in an urban setting, and I just say that because although no one's perfect, no organization is perfect, Sky Harbor is not perfect. If given accurate information, this would have been a very different situation, and unfortunately, we were not the beneficiary of accurate information. Councilman Pastor? Oh, Councilman Gates and Councilman Pastor, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I thought Chad put it very well when he said that what happened here was the FAA moved a highway in the sky without getting anyone's input, and that's what happened here, and it's wrong. And I'm very disappointed that the FAA has not acknowledged in any way that what they did was wrong. In fact, all that they've done is they've come back with a few minor tweaks that, again, just demonstrates that they're not willing to work with us in any substantive way. And, they applied the categorical exclusion, which, in my opinion, I think everyone else here would agree with me, should not have applied in this situation. And yet, as the mayor has said, they will not apply the categorical exclusion now to put things back to where they were. So I think what we need to do, we really need to stand up as a group here and stand up for the residents, not only in this city, but really throughout the country, other residents that could have the same thing happen to them. Unfortunately, our options are limited, but we have to speak with a unified voice. We have been reasonable. We have put professionals, we have put a former congressman forward to work with them, and it's been unsuccessful because they simply have been unwilling. And at whatever level that direction's coming from is irrelevant. I'm not criticizing those people who are on the working group, but somewhere at some level, they've been told to not work with us. So unfortunately, we have to press further. We have to take a stand, and I do thank very much Councilman Nowakowski and Councilwoman Pastor for their strong leadership, the mayor's leadership, and the entire council on this. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Gates. Councilwoman Pastor?
Yes, I have a question to the city attorney. A lot of people have been talking about litigation, and so do you need further direction from us on pursuing litigation, or do you have the direction needed?
Mayor, Councilwoman Pastor, at this point in the legal process, I have the direction I need to continue to pursue action. And what I would recommend at this point, rather than divulge any sort of legal strategy nor divulge client confidences, that any further action be presented in executive session. And that's not to be obscure, that's just to preserve the legal rights that we, the city, have. And so that would be my recommendation at this point in time.
Okay. I wanted to make a motion,
Please.
but I see Councilwoman Gallego would ask.
Could I just make a few comments, including I represent many individuals from Grant Park who had to leave because of transportation issues. I believe that they may have written comments on their comment cards. This would be Vanjie Miller, Eva Olivas, and other individuals, and I think it's important that be part of the official record. They do try very hard to come here, but face some challenges on the transportation side. They're in a neighborhood that has been impacted by airport noise for years, as is much of the constituency of District 8. As Councilman Nowakowski mentioned, we have moved people out of the places they call home, and we're very special. We spend far more than $3.6 million on this particular project, on noise-related moves and other noise mitigation, far more than $3.6 million, and we don't want to continue to grow the problem, but we do need to recognize that noise has been a problem for many residents of Phoenix before September 18th, and we as a city owe them responsibility to continue to make them part of the conversation. So I'm glad that we are going to be doing that, and when I'm done, I hope we can get some of their comment cards in there. I did want to say that it is insulting for the FAA to say that we did not offer alternatives in partnership with Councilwoman Pastor. I've spoken with the regional FAA, the FAA administrator in DC, his boss, and his boss. And we've gone there with maps and had conversations that indicated they didn't know a lot about what's happening on the ground, that more people live in Grant Park than the river bottom. You know, really not a lot of knowledge. I think Russ or someone mentioned them not knowing that Grand Avenue went at an angle. We have a lot of knowledge on the ground at the city, and we need to be an important stakeholder that should be consulted when we move a highway in the sky. But we have been there with maps, pointing out where people live who were overlooked, pointing out where the FAA moved flights from over the river to over Lindo Park, a neighborhood that there are environmental justice concerns, pointing out where they moved over Levine from areas that were less impacted, fewer people. So we have been there. We have tried very hard to be an honest partner, and this is hard to read. Some of their responses to our comments, 4,300 tons of CO2 compared to 7 million. I mean, I have an environmental degree. If they need help finding 4,000 tons of CO2 elsewhere, I have plenty of suggestions that will help people and will allow our residents to sleep at night. So, they really need to be honest partners in this and have an honest conversation. When we were sitting there pointing out the map, they should have told us that they weren't even considering, as Congressman Pastor alluded to, our suggestions. It was just been they've not been a fair partner, and it's been difficult to deal with. I also wanted to make sure we continue to talk about cargo traffic. For many of our people who are woken up at night, some of those flights are at night, and I know many of the comments here today have talking about commercial air, but some of the problems that are keeping people up at night are cargo, and that continues to be something that I want to put on the table, because we really want our citizens to get a good night's sleep and have great days, but waking people up at night does have significant health impacts, and that needs to be part of that. So I will turn things over to the mayor, but if it's possible to get some of that feedback from Grant Park, they did
Thank you very
make
much.
an effort to be here.
Eva Olavis had made a mention that she is not supporting a lawsuit, and she wanted to save the money for the general fund. That was her position on these important issues. Councilman Valenzuela, and then I guess Councilman DeCiccio has some comments, and I want to make sure Laura has a chance to make the motion she was starting just a few moments ago. Councilman Valenzuela.
I do want to get to the motion, but I do want to say that neighborhood revitalization and economic development have been top policy priorities of mine since taking office, and any issues that impact quality of life of our residents or potential negative economic impacts must be addressed head on, as what has been happening for months. I chair the Downtown Aviation Redevelopment Subcommittee for the City of Phoenix for this council, and I sit on the Housing and Development Subcommittee, and we first assembled a meeting with our neighborhood leaders, many of which are in this room, our aviation team, many of which are in this room, and that was back on October 22nd. We wanted to create a response to the FAA. Certainly, I'm not the only one. Clearly, there's been some true champions on this council, along with our city staff, to do so. Immediately, I sent a letter to our entire federal delegation with the help of our neighborhood leaders. Immediately, we made this topic a standing item on the aviation subcommittee, so that each month we would hear directly from the aviation team, aviation staff, on the very latest. And to our aviation team, I want to thank you, because every single meeting you came prepared. And of course, I expect that we know that will continue. That is just your character and what we can come to expect. But you come prepared each month with the absolute latest. Our residents certainly come prepared each month, because it gives our residents an opportunity to hear the latest, but to, more importantly, be heard themselves. We'll continue to do that at the Aviation Subcommittee. And I want to thank Congressman Pastor once again. What a true advocate this man is. A true, we know that the man is a public servant, but what a statesman, and someone that every single one of us on this dais can learn from, and anyone in public office can learn from. So we're appreciative of the congressman being a Phoenician and advocating on behalf of all of us, of course, as neighbors, whether it's a formal leadership
role or informal. The man is a leader, and I appreciate that. I do, again, want to thank all of our neighborhood leaders who are here, not only on your behalf, but clearly on the behalf of your neighbors. And thank you for being present, for all the email. The comment was made, hey, I sent about 8 email, and I'm sure you're tired of it. I don't think anyone up here is tired of that. I hope you were feeling that everyone up here understands, and I hope you understand that we are all in this together, including our aviation team. We're in this together. We're not finished, though the FAA may seem to think that we are. I don't think we are. We're far from that. And I, like everyone else on this council, it seems like I'm disappointed in the decision from the FAA. I am also disappointed in how how the FAA has conducted itself as we moved along in this through this process. I pride myself and the action of the office that I represent on the amount of public input that we receive. And I've said it a million times, public input is not a box. It should never be treated as a box that simply gets checked. We should be governing based on public input. And I really do believe the FAA can learn from that. I think the FAA needs to learn from that. And together, I think we are, we'll give the FAA another, I'd like to call it another opportunity, but, at some point, they really do need to learn from that. And like everyone else on this council, I'm looking forward to continuing down this path, and hopefully they will.
Thank you very much. Councilman DeCiccio?
Thank you, Mayor, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to comment on this. And I do want to thank Congressman Pastor, and I do want to thank Michael Nowakowski and Laura Pastor for providing such input on this, and their leadership on it has been fantastic. Early on, Jim Waring brought up the point. He basically said, look, you're not going to get anything from the FAA. And that was back in December. And so far, we received nothing from the FAA. So I want to make sure I understand the clarity. So the box I want to check off, and for the public to understand, is what is the direction of the city of Phoenix? Because quite frankly, I'm not quite sure yet. And Dan said he understood that, our city attorney. So I'm going to ask Dan this question. Dan, the direction you received today, was that enough for you to file a lawsuit? Yes or no?
All right, quick question. First off, the first question I'm going to ask Dan on that one is, if you prefer to answer that in executive session, you can.
Well, he can ask. He can ask. I can ask that question.
You can certainly ask any question you want. Councilman, you can ask any question you want. However, I'm asking that question because
I don't want to be wishy-washy here, Mayor. I think the public needs to know what we're going to do, and I want to ask Dan that specific question. Now, if he doesn't want to answer it, that's his choice. But I did not hear that, and I want to make sure he heard that.
Actually, Councilman, with all due respect, giving legal advice as counsel in a public setting.
That's not legal advice. I want to understand that I want to know what he heard. Did he hear for us to move forward with a lawsuit, yes or no?
Councilman, I appreciate the nature of the question. I'll leave it up to
Mayor, you're ducking the question yourself. I'm asking Dan the question.
I know you are, Councilman,
but I would appreciate not being interrupted, Mayor. This is my question. I'm an elected official. I have the right to ask him that question. Did he hear that today or not? I want to hear it because I heard a lot of talk, but I didn't hear clear direction, and I want to know what he heard.
Councilman, you can ask any question you want. However, as chair of the meeting...
You're interrupting me, Mayor. I have a right to ask that question.
Councilman, the question has been asked. The direction I'm giving to Dan is it's up to him whether or not he feels like that would be giving legal advice in a public meeting, which would not be appropriate. That
and
would
I'm
be appropriate
saying
for
that is not legal advice. I'm just asking if he heard that.
Councilman, with all due respect, that's not your determination to make. Mr. Brown, it's up to you how you want to answer the question. I want to make sure you...
But, Mayor, you've been wishy-washy on this thing. I want to hear what Dan Brown has to say on this.
Councilman, you can characterize it any way you want. My job as chair of the meeting is to make sure that legal advice is not given in a public setting, as is the responsibility of the city attorney. I'm asking him whether he feels comfortable answering or not. If he doesn't, I want to give him the option of answering that question in
Well, Mayor, I don't
executive
want to
session.
I just want to ask the question. Thank you.
The question has been asked. Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
So, Mayor, council members, this is what I've heard. I am continually, and I'm authorized to continue to make legal preparations, and we, as part of staff and our outside counsel, continue to do that. But with regard to anything more than that, it would be a potential violation of the attorney-client privilege and would be legal strategy. And so I would be happy to discuss that in detail in executive session. But beyond that...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
But beyond that, I think it's appropriate to discuss in executive session.
So in executive session, we'll make the determination whether or not we move forward with legal action. Is that correct?
I think let me take a first run at that.
Mayor, can I please ask him the question, let him answer it without you interrupting?
I'm sorry, I'm not interrupting.
I'm asking some specific questions. The public deserves to know what's going on, what's going to happen, and who has the right to make that decision.
Okay, Councilman, I believe that the direction has been given to legal counsel. I think he's trying not to reveal what was said in our last
I'm not
executive
saying
session.
that. I'm asking him, will that decision be made in executive session? That's a yes or no. That's a simple one.
Well, direction will be given, not final decision will be made in executive
God,
session,
Mayor.
but direction from this council will be given in executive session. You know as well as I do the rules of executive session. Mr. Brown, if you have any answer beyond
Mayor,
that.
can I just ask him the questions without you interrupting? Please allow me to do that. It's not polite. It's not fair for you to filibuster.
I'm sorry,
I'm asking a simple question.
Councilman, I don't mean to be impolite to you in any regard. However, it is my responsibility as chair of the meeting to ensure that discussions should be had in executive session or not had an open session. So I'm trying to protect the integrity of the legal position of the city. Mr. Brown.
Yeah, Mayor, you basically said it. We really need to discuss the details of any legal action in executive session, because to do so really potentially compromises the attorney-client privilege. And so I'd rather not get into detail other than saying that we continue to make legal preparations.
All right, well, I'm not asking you for details, Dan. Let me be very clear, and I think wishy-washy comments provide wishy-washy responses from the FAA. I'm going to be very clear, because the only reason the FAA is at the bargaining table is because we have threatened them with a lawsuit. So from my position, and I know that I've talked to Councilman Waring about this as well, from day one, we should have been a lot more firm in what it is we were looking to do. They provided nothing. They've been very disrespectful to us. They've been disrespectful to Congressman Pastor and to the process. They've even admitted that they have made a mistake, that they should not have proceeded the way they did when they changed the line, when they changed the path. They've done that. They've admitted that in public meetings. And it has always been the threat of the lawsuit. So you can only rattle a saber for so long before no action occurs on the other side. So from my end, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to, because I think the public needs to know exactly where I'm going to be coming from on this. And I want the FAA to hear this loudly and clearly. If they do not act, and they do not act immediately, I will be favorable towards filing a lawsuit against the FAA. I want the public to hear that, I want the FAA to hear that, and I want everyone else to hear that. Because if they don't understand that, they will never act, and they will continually delay until they believe that this problem will just go away, which it will not. We have an obligation to protect the public, and they need to know where we stand. And that's where I stand there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilman. So you'll be favorably disposed to filing a lawsuit if they don't act quickly?
Like today. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Pastor, did you have a motion?
I do have a motion. My motion is to continue. My motion is to discontinue the engagement of the PBN working group, to renew requests to the FAA to revert to the previous flight paths using new RNAV technology, authorize staff to aggressively pursue the 6-point strategic framework. And that is it.
And I'll second that, Mayor.
We have a motion and a second. Again, those actions are the actions recommended by our professional city staff as actions in addition to a litigation strategy of the city. So to be absolutely clear.
Can I ask just a,
Absolutely, Mayor.
Councilman Waring.
just, so there are no more, the meetings that Congressman Pastor is involved in, the PBN, I think it was called, there are no more meetings scheduled, right? Are we
Correct.
expecting to have more meetings? We're not canceling meetings on anybody, just so the public's clear. I don't believe that we are.
I think the motion is that in light of what has occurred up to this point, it would not be a good use of our professional staff's time nor the congressman's time to continue to participate in that process.
So we're just going to stop, is that?
That is, I think that's the nature of the motion, is that we will no longer, as a city, participate in those meetings.
And as the congressman mentioned, we weren't the one canceling or postponing the meetings.
All right, so that is the nature of the motion. There is a motion, there is a second. Roll call.
Councilman DeCiccio?
Yes.
Councilwoman Gallego?
Yes.
Councilman Gates?
Yes.
Councilman Nowakowski?
Yes.
Councilwoman Pastor?
Yes.
Councilman Waring? Yes. Vice Mayor Valenzuela?
Yes.
Mayor Stanton?
Yes, so the motion unanimously passes. Thanks to the community for coming out to today's meeting. Obviously, we owe a huge thank you to Congressman Pastor, our professional city staff. So you'll be hearing from us very shortly. Thank you.